Chapter 2390. In the first level of the Jiutian Shuluo Tower. It was a vast and dark space. In the middle was a square with a radius of 10 miles. It was surrounded by rows of houses and buildings. When Ji Tianqing first came here, there were statues of the Yin-Yang saints in the square. There were 2 dead pine trees in the corner of the square. There were jade tables and stools under the trees. There were thousands of houses and palaces that could accommodate 100,000 people. However, there was no one. In the end, Ji Tianqing found a mountain of bones in the main hall. It was in the mountain of bones that he found a pearl. It was formed by the divine consciousness of the common people. Of course, this was a few years ago. Now that Ji Tianqing had returned to this place, he wanted to settle the disciples of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains into this space. He stood above the black square. His eyes passed through the darkness and scanned the surrounding houses and buildings. Although many of the houses and palaces were dilapidated, it was not a problem. The craftsmen of the Earth Spirit Tribe and the disciples of the Tianzhu Mountain would be able to repair them quickly. Ji Tianqing released his divine consciousness and covered the entire space. He checked carefully. After confirming that this space was absolutely safe, he opened the world and the sword and let the people of the Tianzhu Mountain out. Swoosh! Swoosh! The Huanglong Taoist, the elders, and the deacons were the first to arrive at the square. Everyone was startled for a moment. After using their divine sense to observe the surrounding situation, they all revealed looks of surprise and curiosity. Hey, where is this? This space is dark, but there are many ancient buildings. Could it be a ruin? The spiritual chi of heaven and earth here is abundant. If it's safe enough, it's the best place to live in seclusion. Everyone looked around curiously and whispered to each other. After 100 breaths, thousands of disciples also arrived at the square. Everyone was seriously injured and dispirited. However, they were still orderly and not in a mess. Ji Tianqing raised his hand and signaled for everyone to quiet down. He said in a dignified tone, "This space is the first level of an ancient divine pagoda. The divine pagoda is hidden in a secret realm. Even a martial god can't find it. It's absolutely safe for everyone to live in seclusion here. From today onwards, the members of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains would temporarily reside here. I hope that everyone can work hard and do their best to improve their strength. One day, we will rebuild the Pillar of Heaven's mountain and annihilate the Heaven Punishers to take our revenge." A deep and vigorous voice spread throughout the entire square, reverberating in the dark space. Thousands of disciples were infected by Ji Tianqing's words. Their blood surged and their hearts were filled with hope. Ji Tianqing pointed at the buildings in the darkness and said, "There are thousands of houses and palaces here, more than enough for everyone to live in. Although many of the houses are dilapidated, I will send people to repair them. In a moment, Huanglong and the other elders will arrange accommodations for the disciples so that they can heal their injuries as soon as possible." Huanglong Taoist and several elders hurriedly bowed and said, "Yes, sir." Ji Tianqing finished his instructions and turned to leave. At this moment, Huanglong Taoist caught up with him and transmitted his voice to him, "Master, I have something to report to you." Ji Tianqing stopped and turned his head to look at him, asking, "What is it?" Huanglong replied respectfully, "Master, although we have emptied the treasury of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains before we left, we have also gathered all the resources and brought all of them here. However, I have roughly estimated that the cultivation resources are only enough for our sect to use for about 8 years. 8 years? Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and thought to himself, "I don't need 8 years, at most 2 years, I will definitely be able to recover to the divine realm. Perhaps, I will have a way to annihilate the Heaven Punishers by then and I won't have to worry about this anymore." However, he still had to give Huanglong an explanation to stabilize the morale of the disciples. 8 years is still a long time. I will think of a way to find or plunder more resources. You only need to command and educate the disciples. I will take care of the cultivation resources. Huanglong Daoist heaved a sigh of relief and nodded, I understand. Then, he took out a fist-sized silver-white crystal from his wide sleeve. Master, I have followed your instructions and taken away the origin of the star divine furnace. Black Dragon, Qianyu, and the star crystal core are still in the origin crystal and are unharmed. Ji Tianqing took the silver-white crystal and saw that there were indeed 2 tiny specks of light inside. They were Black Dragon and Qianyu. In addition, there was also a walnut-sized star crystal core. This fist-sized origin crystal had already shrunk by several 100,000 times and was extremely condensed. Ji Tianqing would only be able to restore it to its original state after he had finished setting up the array and was fully prepared. He took the origin crystal core and gave some instructions to Huanglong Daoist before he turned and left. A moment later, Ji Tianqing returned to the 5th floor of the Divine Pagoda. He stood on the Demon God altar and looked at the 18 Demon God statues around him. This altar is the core of the Divine Pagoda and has been set up with the origin divine array. Although the altar has powerful divine power, it is not suitable for nurturing the origin crystal core. He muttered to himself and then looked up at the dome of the hall. There was a huge star diagram on the dome, showing the boundless starry sky. He knew very well that the tens of thousands of specks of starlight were formed from real stars. This star diagram was actually a starry sky with a radius of 1 billion miles. Only a god king could condense it billions of times and store it in this divine pagoda. Ji Tianqing's lips curled into a smile as he sensed the endless star energy contained in the star diagram. With such a vast amount of star energy, it would be enough to condense a few thousand star furnaces. If I set up the array here, I can quickly restore the star divine furnace. I can even refine the star crystal core in the shortest time possible. After making up his mind, he flew to the center of the hall and took out 6 sage artifacts and hundreds of supreme-grade spirit stones to set up the array. The 6 sage artifacts were the core of the array and the hundreds of spirit stones were the nodes. They were spread out in the hall. Ji Tianqing was fully focused on casting the array. He waved his hand and sent out tens of thousands of dermic power light beams to quickly set up the array. Time passed silently. Unknowingly, 10 days had passed. A heavenly cycle star array with a radius of 10,000 feet was finally set up. Although this array was not big and was only a simplified version, it was countless times more condensed. It was not a problem to use it to support the divine furnace's origin crystal. Ji Tianqing took out the fist-sized origin crystal of the divine furnace and placed it in the center of the array. Thus, the origin crystal core automatically absorbed the star energy of the array and expanded at a speed visible to the naked eye. 2 hours later, the origin crystal core had expanded to a diameter of 10,000 feet, filling up the entire array. The array's star energy was lacking, so it absorbed the energy from the star diagram. With the inexhaustible star power, the cauldron was also burning with star fire. Qianyu and the Black Dragon, who were in a deep sleep, gradually woke up. Ji Tianqing used his divine sense to talk to the two of them for a while and explained the current situation. Then, he left with peace of mind and went to the 6th level of the Divine Pagoda. Chapter 2391. Ji Tianqing returned to the 6th level of the pagoda. The distorted space was as dark and cold as ever. He flew for tens of thousands of miles before he found Yun Yao beside Ji Ku. Yao Yao, why aren't you recuperating? He asked curiously as he stood beside Yun Yao. Yun Yao pointed at Ji Ku, who was cultivating, and said excitedly, "Ah, Ku's strength has broken through again. That's why there was such a strange phenomenon." Ji Tianqing stared at Ji Ku and realized that her strength had indeed increased by a lot. She had reached the level 3 martial sage realm. Furthermore, the golden flowing light around her body had become half gold and half red. She was even more mysterious and powerful. In the halo that resembled flowing water, the image of a slowly swimming fire bird became clearer. The fire bird was slender and beautiful. It had a crown on its head and its tail feathers were extremely long. It looked like a peacock. Ji Tianqing was shocked and muttered, "The last time we came to see her, she was only a level 2 martial sage. Only 1 month has passed. She has cultivated here for 4 years and has advanced by another level. She is so talented that she is even more talented than us. That's incredible." Yunyao nodded in agreement and said with a smile, "It seems that the demon god's inheritance that Ku obtained is also a supreme god's divine skill. The owner of this pagoda must be the demon god's divine king. Its power attribute is very similar to Ku's. That's why there is such an effect." Ji Tianqing thought for a while and pointed at the fire bird on the light screen. He asked, "Do you think that the demon god's divine king is related to this fire bird?" Yunyao was stunned for a while. She nodded and said, "That's possible." When Ku obtained the demon god's inheritance, she said that she fell into a strange dream. In the dream, she not only saw a magnificent battle between gods, she also saw the fall of a divine bird that covered the sky. If we are not wrong, the divine bird that covered the sky is the owner of the pagoda, the demon god's divine king. This shadow is still a bit blurry. It looks like a peacock. Ji Tianqing rubbed his chin and said thoughtfully, "What kind of divine bird would that monster race god king be? Like a peacock?" Yunyao frowned and said, "This range is a little too big. The blue Luan, the divine eagle, the golden crow, the four-eyed bird, and the legendary Huan Yu are all similar to this phantom." Ji Tianqing shook his head and said with a smile, "Forget it. Let's not talk about this for now. Ku will tell us the answer later." After saying that, he and Yunyao turned around and left. The two of them found a place in the dark space and began to cultivate in seclusion. For the first half of the year, the two of them had been circulating their energy to heal their injuries. After their injuries had healed and their powers had returned to their peak, the two of them focused on cultivating and worked hard to break through to the rank 8 martial sage realm. Of course, the 8th level of the martial saint realm was only the beginning. Their final goal was to achieve the martial god realm as soon as possible. Only when Ji Tianqing reached the immortal state and perfected his sword Dao could he use a supreme divine power to fight against the heaven punishers. 10 days passed. News of the Pillar of Heaven's mountain's destruction had already spread throughout half of the Shenwu continent. The heaven punishers' name had once again shocked the various races, and they had become one of the most powerful forces in the continent. The related legends and news spread wildly throughout the continent, and everyone knew about them. In the eyes of the various races, the heaven punishers, who had come from the starry skies, were even more powerful and cruel than the ancient and mysterious demon race. At the same time, the heaven punishers had also become the 4th most powerful force, comparable to the 3 divine kingdoms. The various martial forces of the various races were watching from the sidelines. The heaven punishers were so ambitious that they kept on invading and expanding their territory. Who was their next target? Within the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. The heaven punishers had already occupied this area for 10 days. And you led many soldiers and built a majestic heaven punishing palace on the ruins of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, and arranged for it to be heavily guarded. He presided over the heaven punishing palace and sent out many martial god realm captains to control the city lords of all the cities. The 9 sects and 18 clans had already been destroyed. The heaven punishers controlled many city lords and truly controlled this territory. In the past 10 days, and you and the experts of the heaven punishers had been very busy. And you wanted to completely take over the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Just controlling the city lords was not enough. He also sent out thousands of black-armored warriors to guard the various cities. This way, he would completely stop the people from resisting. The entire Pillar of Heaven's mountains was controlled by the heaven punishers. Hundreds of millions of people had become slaves for the heaven punishers. On this morning, and you sent out an order from the heaven punishing palace to all the cities. Then, many heaven punishers ordered the city lords to gather hundreds of thousands of slaves in the cities. These slaves were mostly young and strong martial artists, regardless of gender or race. Not only did they need to excavate the mountain and obtain cultivation resources for the heaven punishers, but they also needed to build fortifications and fortify walls. They also had to build city walls, forts, and fortifications. They also had to raise demon beasts and plant spirit herbs for the heaven punishers. In short, now that the heaven punishers controlled the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, they wanted to wantonly plunder the resources of this territory. In the past, when the Pillar of Heaven's mountains ruled this territory, they had never done such a thing. For the sake of a long-term plan, the amount of cultivation resources that each city could mine and use was limited. However, the heaven punishers were different. They did not think about long-term livelihoods and did not care about the lives of the people. As long as it was a resource that they could use, they would plunder it without caring about the consequences. Even if the Pillar of Heaven's mountains became a barren land a few years later, they would not regret it. At most, they would just invade other territories. After all, they were the plundering forces that wreaked havoc in the universe. Soon, chaos and killing erupted in the various cities because of the slave recruitment. Any normal person would not be willing to lose their freedom and become a slave like an animal. However, since the heaven punishers had given the order, the city lords' residents could only carry it out. They used forceful methods to gather slaves. When the people in the cities saw the city lords' residents extend its evil claws to their own people, how could they not be angry and disappointed? The many people and martial artists naturally resisted with all their might and clashed with the city lords' residents. However, the resistance of the people was too weak. The heaven punishers stationed in the various cities used bloody and cruel methods to slaughter a group of people who resisted. The chaos was suppressed. Soon, the various cities had gathered 300 to 500,000 slaves and started to plunder resources. After a few days, the plundering plan was on the right track. The mountains and mines near the various cities were dug up by the slaves. Large amounts of ores were mined every day. After being refined, they were turned into spirit stones and sent to the city lords' residence. After accumulating a certain amount, the heaven punishers would send the spirit stones to the heaven punishers' palace and hand them over to Anu. In addition, the construction plans of the various cities were carried out in an orderly manner. Raising demonic beasts and planting spirit herbs was also carried out smoothly. In a short month, the Pillar of Heaven's mountains had completely become the heaven punishers' territory. No martial artist or faction dared to challenge the heaven punishers' rule anymore. Of course. Everyone had a trace of hope and faith in their hearts. Chapter 2392. Unknowingly, 2 months had passed. News of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains' destruction was still circulating in the continent, but its influence had weakened greatly. What made the various races slightly more at ease was that the heaven punisher had temporarily stopped their attacks. It was as if they were satisfied with conquering the 72 cities and the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Over the past 2 months, the heaven punisher had been managing their territories and conserving their strength. An endless amount of cultivation resources poured into the heaven punisher's treasury to increase the strength of the heaven punisher warriors. The citizens of the 72 cities and the Pillar of Heaven's mountains were in a miserable state, but they were powerless to resist and could only silently endure. Only some experts and large forces with foresight could see the heaven punisher's ambitions and plans. The cruel and greedy heaven punisher would definitely not be satisfied with the current situation. After a period of recuperation, they would definitely be able to gather even more strength and invade even more territories. Martial god Luo Shui was one of these foresight experts. Over the past 2 months, she had been at the upstanding water altar. After her injuries had healed, she had focused on researching the divine warships that they had seized. The owners of those divine warships had been killed by her. The divine warships had become ownerless objects that she could disassemble and research freely. As the saying went, Only by knowing yourself and your enemy could you be victorious in every battle. Only by understanding the Heaven Punisher's warships could she find a way to deal with them. After a month of research, she had finally thoroughly researched the warships. The Heaven Punisher's warships were essentially flying divine tools. Most of the warships were low-grade divine tools. However, these warships were supported by the Heaven Punisher's array and were extremely suited for traversing the void. If she used the same method to deal with ordinary divine tools to deal with these warships, it would be difficult. Luo Shui pondered for a long time and decided to dig deeper into the secrets and find a shortcut to deal with the warships. She had originally thought that these warships would absorb the power of the stars to be able to fly in the void for a long time. However, she realized that she was wrong. The Heaven Punisher's array had nothing to do with the power of the stars. Instead, it used a special power. This power did not belong to the 5 elements but truly existed in the world. It was just that the people of the Shenwu continent did not know how to use it. Luo Shui was unable to decipher the mystery of the array, so she sent a message to Ji Tianqing to inquire about the situation. 2 months had passed in the outside world, and Ji Tianqing had already cultivated for more than 8 years on the 6th level of the Divine Tower. His strength had successfully broken through to the rank 8 martial sage realm and his martial arts foundation was firm and solid. He did not continue to break through to the 9th level martial sage realm as he temporarily stopped cultivating. After leaving the 6th floor, he appeared on the 5th floor's demonic god altar. The heavenly cycle stellar array was not far away. The star divine furnace in the Great Formation had already been filled with the star fire, exuding a surging aura. Qian Yu and the Black Dragon were refining the star nucleus. The star nucleus had already turned silvery white, and the impurities were becoming fewer and fewer. Ji Tianqing estimated that it would take another 3 to 5 months at most for the star core to be completed. At that time, he would be able to collect some supplementary materials to upgrade the burial of heaven. Afterward, he activated the Origin Divine Formation and headed to the 1st level of the Divine Pagoda to check on the situation of the Heavenly Pillar Mountain disciples. The disciples of Pillar of Heaven's mountains had already settled down. The dilapidated buildings had long since been repaired by Earth Spirit craftsmen. Over 1,000 disciples had basically recovered from their injuries, and were all cultivating diligently in their respective residences. Huang Long and the other elders would often guide the disciples in their cultivation when they were not cultivating. After checking on the disciples' conditions, Ji Tianqing opened the door of the Divine Pagoda. He found the Huang Long Daoist and instructed him, outside the Divine Pagoda is the legendary Yin Yang secret realm. It is a small world. Not only is it rich in spiritual qi and resources, but there are also many ferocious demonic beasts. Normally, the disciples do not have to cultivate in seclusion. You can also enter the secret realm to train. The Huanglong Daoist was overjoyed and nodded his head in agreement. Master, you're absolutely right. I also have the same idea, but I have not been able to realize it. Since the secret realm is outside the Divine Pagoda, that is great. Ji Tianqing did not say much. After giving a few more instructions, he left. He went to the 4th level of the Divine Pagoda and found the little blue Kuan and the white dragon in the boundless deity ocean. Under the white dragon's guidance, the little blue Kuan's strength had increased significantly. It had broken through to the martial sage realm, and its body had increased by a few times. The white dragon had also recovered well. Its spiritual soul had become more solid and its strength was gradually recovering. When the white dragon saw Ji Tianqing, it was overjoyed and looked as if it had been relieved of a heavy burden. Seeing its reaction, Ji Tianqing opened his mouth to ask for the reason. The white dragon smiled bitterly and said, Master, although this deity ocean is the home of the little blue Kuan, it is vast and free. However, it is just the two of us here. After staying here for too long, I am tired of it. Moreover, if I cultivate here with it, my strength will recover too slowly. Now that I am ready to form my celestial body, I can't do it here. Ji Tianqing nodded his head and smiled. Since you have stayed here long enough, follow me. I will bring you to the 6th level of the Divine Pagoda. The flow of time there is 50 times faster than the outside world. Only by cultivating there can you quickly increase your strength and form your celestial body. Hearing this, the white dragon was excited and cheered. That's great. I thought that there were no artifacts in the mortal world that could accelerate time. Back then, when we were in the realm of the gods, we cultivated in seclusion for thousands of years. We relied on the time artifacts. Ji Tianqing nodded his head slightly and left the deity ocean with the white dragon and the blue koan. Soon, he returned to the 6th level. The white dragon was very familiar with the feeling of time and space being distorted. It did not feel uncomfortable at all. Instead, it was full of excitement and anticipation. Only the blue koan had not experienced it before. It looked timid and silently looked around. Ji Tianqing reminded the two of them, from now on, the two of you can cultivate here in peace. Don't waste time and don't disturb others. The white dragon was suddenly interested and asked curiously, Master, there are other people here? Of course. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, Your 2 mistresses are cultivating in seclusion here. Ah. 2 mistresses. The white dragon was shocked and subconsciously exclaimed, Master, you are finally enlightened. Ji Tianqing's face darkened and he frowned. The white dragon knew that it had said something wrong and smiled awkwardly, cough cough. I am just a child. Please forgive me, Master. I will not dare to disturb your mistresses. I will go cultivate in seclusion now. After saying that, it pulled the confused blue koan and hid in a distance to cultivate. After sending the 2 of them away, Ji Tianqing left the Divine Pagoda and appeared on a barren mountain outside the secret realm. The Divine Pagoda could isolate the heavenly axiom senses and communication jade slips could not enter. He thought that 2 months had passed and perhaps someone would send him a message. It turned out that he guessed right. As soon as he appeared on the peak of the barren mountain, a spiritual light descended from above his head. Swoosh! He reached out and grabbed the spiritual light. A communication jade slip appeared in his palm. Chapter 2393. Luo Shui first asked about Ji Tianqing's situation through the communication jade slip. It was widely rumored that the Pillar of Heaven's mountains had been destroyed and all the disciples had been killed. However, Luo Shui knew that Ji Tianqing had already made arrangements. How could he allow the Pillar of Heaven's mountains to fall to such a state? Then, she told Ji Tianqing about the recent situation of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. The Heaven Punisher army controlled many city lords and completely controlled the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. They recruited slaves from various cities and plundered cultivation resources. Hundreds of millions of people lived in misery. While they endured silently, they dreamed that the Kenshin would return soon and kill their enemies. Finally, Luo Shui mentioned the Heaven Punisher battleships. She told Ji Tianqing the results of her research and asked what that special power was. After Ji Tianqing finished reading the information in the jade slip, he frowned. He thought for a moment before taking out the communication jade slip and replying to Luo Shui. Yun Yao, the disciples of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, and I are living in seclusion in a mystic realm in the ruins of God. We are safe. You don't have to worry. Now, the Heaven Punisher army has taken over the 72 cities and the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. They have rested for 2 months. They will definitely launch an even bigger war. You and I both know that their next target is most likely the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom. You must be careful. As for the Heaven Punisher battleships, they are just ordinary divine battleships. There is nothing to study. As long as we use medial-grade divine artifacts, we can successfully destroy the battleships. As for the power used by the battleships, it is indeed very mysterious. It is a special power that the Heaven Punisher cultivates. It can be called force. Force really exists in heaven and earth, but only a few races can use it. Ji Tianqing used his divine will to record this message in the jade slip. After hesitating for a moment, he continued, "Also, I am preparing to reforge the Burial of Heaven sword. I need some supplementary materials. Since you have already dismantled a few battleships, why don't you send me some parts? Those are good materials for refining divine artifacts. I have no time to go to the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom. Send someone to send the items to the north of the ruins of God and hide them at the foot of Cloud Returning Mountain." After adding a few more sentences, he sent out the communication jade slip. He stood at the peak of the mountain and waited quietly. A quarter of an hour later, Luo Shui sent him another message. The content of the message was very brief, only a few short sentences. "The parts of the battleship are useless to me. I will send the inspector of the divine guards to deliver them to the place you specify." The Luo Shui divine nation's calamity was imminent, but it was unavoidable. They could only do their best and leave it to fate. "I only hope that you and Yunyao can enter seclusion in peace and recover your divine realm as soon as possible. Only then can we resolve this disaster." After Ji Tianqing finished reading, he silently put away the jade slip, turned around, and left. After returning to the divine pagoda, he appeared in the 5th level. Luo Shui would soon send someone to deliver the materials. What he needed to do now was to complete the refinement of the star core as soon as possible. Inside the star divine furnace, Qian Yu and He Long seemed to be tireless, constantly refining star cores day and night. The star crystal core was still thousands of meters wide, and it was silver-white in color. The impurities were already very scarce, and the surface of the crystal core was also diamond-shaped, constantly refracting a dazzling brilliance. Shua! Ji Tianqing stepped into the array and entered the star divine furnace. He personally used a secret technique to control the star fire to speed up the refinement of the star core. Qian Yu and He Long sensed his aura, and they were both excited and worked even harder. Time passed silently. Unknowingly, a month had passed. The impurities of the star crystal core were completely removed, and it was condensed to a diameter of 800 meters. It was crystal clear, as transparent as glass. It contained a vast, boundless, and extremely rich star energy. Obviously, the refinement of the star crystal core was successful. Originally, Ji Tianqing estimated that it would take at least 3 to 5 months to complete the refinement. But when he did it personally, the time was greatly reduced, and it only took a month to complete the refinement. Of course, a large part of the reason was due to the star map on the dome of the hull. That was the real starry sky, and it could provide endless star energy, increasing the power of the star divine furnace by several times. Shua! Ji Tianqing finished his spell and stepped out of the star divine furnace. He stared at the star core in the star fire and muttered to himself, "The star core has been successfully refined, and the materials sent by Luo Shui's men should have arrived by now. Burial of Heaven, you will soon be able to recover your divine artifact form." With that, he stepped onto the demonic god altar and left the Origin Divine Pagoda through the Origin Divine Formation. In a flash of light, he appeared on a barren mountain outside the secret realm. It was late at night, and the sky was as black as ink. Cold winds howled across the mountain peak. Ji Tianqing looked around, but he didn't find anything out of the ordinary, nor did he receive any communication jade slips. Thus, he silently flew through the night sky, heading for Mount Gathering Cloud, which was thousands of miles away. Chapter 2394. Qian Yu and Black Dragon both fantasized that Ji Tianqing would take them to the treasury to choose a divine artifact. Or would he enter a secret realm to receive a majestic power inheritance, or practice some kind of divine technique? A moment later, when the two followed Ji Tianqing to the 6th floor of the tower, their hopes were dashed. Flying in the endless darkness, Black Dragon looked around gloomily and did not say a word. Qian Yu was disappointed and couldn't help but ask, "Old Ji, where are you taking us? Where are our rewards?" Is this the place that will benefit us so much? You're not playing with us again, are you? Ji Tianqing glanced at it and couldn't help but chuckle. You two are so shallow. Cultivation methods, divine artifacts, and treasures are all worldly possessions. Only when one's own strength was powerful could one truly benefit endlessly. Since you're so stupid, I'll be frank. This is a distorted space where the flow of time is 50 times faster than the outside world. If you cultivate here for 50 years, only 1 year will pass in the outside world. Do you understand? Qian Yu and the Black Dragon were stunned for a moment. Then, their eyes lit up as they were filled with shock. Heavens! Time is 50 times faster. If we cultivate here for 500 years, only 10 years will pass in the outside world. Time is the most mysterious power. This space can distort time and space, it's unbelievable. Hee hee. Then won't we become the youngest and most heaven-defying divine beasts in the world? Qian Yu and Black Dragon immediately understood the powerful effect of this space. They also knew that divine beasts were different from humans. Divine beasts grew very slowly and needed a very long time. For example, the dragon race with a low bloodline cultivated for 1,000 years to become a flood dragon and 10,000 years to become a true dragon and step into the immortal state. If the dragon race was like this, then there were all kinds of demon beasts and spirit beasts in the world. Only 1 in 10,000 could cultivate to the immortal state. Qian Yu and Black Dragon's bloodline was extraordinary, their aptitude and comprehension were superb. But even so, they needed to cultivate for at least a few hundred years before they could break through to the immortal state. If they cultivated step by step and reached the immortal state in a few hundred years, Ji Tianqing would have already ascended to the immortal realm and even become a divine king again. At that time, the two of them would become dispensable. This distorted spacetime could solve this problem. Black Dragon looked at Ji Tianqing with shining eyes and said gratefully, "Old Ji, thank you so much. Don't worry, we'll definitely work hard to cultivate here and strive to break through to the deity realm as soon as possible." Qian Yu also looked at Ji Tianqing with a grateful expression. "Old Ji, we misunderstood you just now, please don't take it to heart. Only now do I understand how much effort you've put into this. You've spared no effort to help us grow. We will definitely work hard and not disappoint you. However, cultivating in seclusion for a long period of time will consume a lot of resources. Shouldn't you prepare some for us?" Ji Tianqing immediately rolled his eyes and said snappily, "Don't think too highly of yourself. This distorted spacetime is not specially prepared for you. Yao Yao, Ku, Bai Long, and Lan Kuan are all cultivating here. You two stay quiet and don't disturb them." After that, he took out 2 space rings and gave them to Qian Yu and Black Dragon. These 2 space rings contain the cultivation resources you need for your cultivation. There are also 2 secret arts that are most suitable for you to cultivate. From now on, you'll stay here and cultivate. When you reach the deity realm, you can leave. After saying these 2 words, Ji Tianqing turned and left. Qian Yu and Black Dragon held the space rings and watched his figure disappear into the darkness. Their eyes became firm. After a moment of silence, Black Dragon said in a low muffled voice, "Actually, old Ji has already thought about it and arranged everything for us." Qian Yu rolled his eyes and looked at Black Dragon with a smile. "Silly dragon, did you hear that just now? Yao Yao is also cultivating in seclusion here." "What do you mean?" Black Dragon looked at him with a puzzled face. Qian Yu blinked at it and smiled mysteriously. She said in a strange tone, "Have you forgotten? Yao Yao's mount is called Lu Li. She's your future wife." Black Dragon froze for a moment and lowered his head awkwardly. "Don't talk nonsense. What future wife? There's no such thing." Seeing Black Dragon's reaction, Qian Yu smiled even more mockingly and said, "If you're not a silly dragon, you'll have to fight for this kind of thing. If you don't take the initiative to get close to Lu Li, she won't remember you. Don't just stand there. Go find Yao Yao and get in touch with Lu Li. Black Dragon shook his head and said in a low voice, I'm not familiar with Lu Li. We haven't seen each other for a few years. She probably doesn't remember me. Xian Yu smiled and said, the first time you're unfamiliar, the second time you're familiar. Do you want me to go with you and give you some courage? Black Dragon hesitated, not knowing how to choose. At this moment, Ji Tianqing's majestic voice suddenly sounded in their minds. What I said just now, did you two ignore it? Do you still want to talk about love at this time? Xian Yu and Black Dragon trembled and quickly put away their distracting thoughts and found a place to cultivate. At the same time, in the darkness 10,000 miles away, Ji Tianqing also took out a divine cauldron and prepared to upgrade the Sword of Burial of Heaven. It was an ancient bronze cauldron. Its shape was simple and clumsy. It was square in shape and had distinct edges. The ancient cauldron had 3 legs, 4 corners, and 8 handles. There were countless array patterns carved on the cauldron and 2 ancient black characters. 9 heavens. Without a doubt, this was the 9 heavens cauldron in the Divine Weapon Pavilion. This was a genuine divine weapon and not a divine weapon from the divine martial continent. Therefore, Ji Tianqing rarely used this cauldron. Even now, with his strength, he could barely control it and could not release the true power of the 9 heavens cauldron. Although I haven't recovered to the divine realm, it shouldn't be a problem for me to control the 9 heavens cauldron to refine weapons. Ji Tianqing stood in the darkness and looked at the 9 heavens cauldron seriously. He slowly raised his palms and started to cast a spell. Swish. 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 He waved his palms and shot out thousands of rays of magic power into the divine cauldron. Soon, the array of the divine cauldron was activated and the entire cauldron lit up with golden light. Whine. The golden light flickered for a moment and the 9 heavens cauldron expanded 100 times. It was as tall and majestic as a mountain. The array patterns on the cauldron lit up as well. Dense energy flowed and exuded a sacred and unparalleled aura. After half a month, Ji Tianqing only activated 3 arrays. Golden divine flames lit up in the 9 heavens cauldron. The temperature rose rapidly and reached a terrifying level. Ji Tianqing continued to cast the spell for a month. When the divine flames in the cauldron reached the maximum, he took out the Sword of Burial of Heaven and placed it in. Chapter 2395. The Sword of Burial of Heaven was only a divine artifact. In order to restore it to a divine artifact, it had to be tempered over a long period of time. Not only did it have to remove the impurities, but it also had to fuse with many divine artifact materials and restructure its internal structure and array. Of course, the Sword World and the Yang Tomb were not affected. Ji Tianqing sat cross-legged in the air with his eyes closed and a solemn expression on his face. His hands were constantly forming seals. Colorful seals fell into the 9 heavens cauldron like snowflakes. Under his control, the 9 heavens cauldron glowed with golden light and blazed with divine flames, quickly refining the Sword of Burial of Heaven and many other materials. Time passed silently. Soon, the 9 heavens cauldron's power could not be replenished in time and began to weaken. Ji Tianqing had to take out a large number of spirit stones and throw them into the cauldron. The cauldron's power quickly recovered and continued to refine the Sword of Burial of Heaven and other materials. Unknowingly, 2 years passed. The Sword of Burial of Heaven had long been refined into a crimson iron rod with all its impurities removed. The star crystal core and the black metal strips were also melted into silver and black liquid. Under Ji Tianqing's control, the 2 colored liquids began to fuse with the Sword of Burial of Heaven. This process was very slow and could not afford the slightest mistake. After a full 4 years, the 2 materials were finally truly fused with the Sword of Burial of Heaven. At this time, the the sword of burial of heaven had shrunk to a length of 300 meters and was silver and black. The divine sword embryo had been refined. Next, he needed to add many supplementary materials and add a divine array. Ji Tianqing had been continuously casting spells for 6 years. He was already exhausted and his mind was exhausted to the extreme. Even his dermic power had been depleted hundreds of times and could only rely on cultivation resources to recover. The 9 Heavens Cauldrons operation also required a large number of spirit stones and resources. As a result, the cultivation resources stored in his spatial ring were decreasing at an extremely fast rate. However, the divine sword was only half reforged. No matter how tired he was, he had to grit his teeth and persevere. Ji Tianqing had been refining in the divine tower for 6 years, but only a month and a half had passed in the 5 elements world. At the same time, Tianzhu Mountain. In the ruins of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, inside the Palace of Heaven Punishing. An Yu, who was clad in golden armor, was sitting on the throne in the meeting hall. In the spacious and bright hall stood 18 captains in silver armor. The atmosphere in the hall was solemn and dignified. Everyone looked at An Yu with burning eyes, their eyes full of anticipation. An Yu looked around and said in a dignified tone, "Everyone, it has been 4 months since we successfully occupied the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. In the past 4 months, we have firmly controlled the 72 cities and the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. We have already turned these 2 regions into our territory. We've recruited hundreds of millions of slaves and are constantly excavating and plundering resources. Currently, our treasury is very full. After 4 months of recuperation, the strength of our soldiers has also increased, and they have recovered to their peak condition. I believe that everyone is well prepared and can't wait to launch a bigger war and invade a wider territory." The 18 silver-armored captains all smiled knowingly and nodded in agreement. Deputy General An is right. The sabers of the soldiers have been thirsting for blood for a long time. Our race lives to kill and conquer. Without war and slaughter, what's the point of living? What does a mere 72 cities and the Pillar of Heaven's mountains amount to? It's just a small place, and it's not enough for us to live in. That's right. Our goal is the entire Shenwu continent, and even the entire 5 elements realm. No, 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 you're all too shallow. Our journey is, the Sea of Stars. Many of the captains were discussing excitedly. After a few months of interaction, everyone was even more convinced of An Yu's abilities. Originally, some of the captains had held grudges and jealousy against An Yu, but now, those feelings were gradually dispelled. Everyone had to admit that An Yu's talent was greater than theirs. It was no wonder that General Long Fu had placed him in such an important position. After everyone discussed for a while, An Yu waved his hand to signal for everyone to quiet down. He nodded slightly and said in a solemn tone, "Everyone is right. Only war and slaughter can make our race stronger and live more meaningfully. Our next target is the damned Luoshui Divine Kingdom." However, General Long Fu sent a message to me earlier to discuss the next step of the plan. Although our soldiers are the strongest of the strongest, the elites of the elites, our numbers are too small. But we are too few in number to do everything by ourselves. Luo Shui and Ji Tianqing assassinated a batch of them, and now, we only have 38 captains and 4,200 soldiers left. Among them, there are more than 10 captains and 2,000 soldiers, and they still have to guard our territory. Thus, only 20 captains and 2,000 soldiers can be dispatched to the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom. Hearing An Yu's words, the dozen or so captains quieted down and frowned worriedly. That's right. Our lack of numbers is our greatest weakness. We are unpolished jade, and the natives of Shenwu continent are lowly clay tiles. How can we fight them? Deputy General An, since you've discussed this with General Long Fu, you must have a countermeasure, right? A few of the captains began to discuss, and someone asked. An Yu nodded and revealed a confident smile. That's right. The countermeasure is simple, and we've always done the same when we've been conquering the heavens. That is, to subdue another with another. Gather the 72 cities and the Pillar of Heaven's army and attack the Luoshui divine kingdom. Our soldiers are all strong, and each of them can take charge of an area on their own. Even a single soldier has the strength of a martial sage, which is comparable to the Luoshui divine kingdom's commander and emperor. Everyone had a sudden realization, and they all revealed knowing smiles. One of the captains hurriedly suggested, "Why do we have to go through so much trouble? Haven't we already gathered hundreds of millions of slaves? Gather those slaves, and let our soldiers lead them, and we can immediately attack the Luoshui divine kingdom." And you nodded and smiled. Of course, this method is feasible, but it's not accurate enough. The slaves help us plunder resources, and this plan cannot be stopped. We cannot send all the slaves to participate in the war. Thus, we have to select the strongest 10 million from the hundreds of millions of slaves to form an army. Under the leadership of our soldiers, the 10 million soldiers will be invincible, and we will take down the Luoshui divine kingdom in the shortest time possible. When the captains heard this, their blood began to boil, and an intense fighting spirit burst forth from their bodies. This plan is brilliant. That's great. We will soon be able to gallop through the Luoshui divine kingdom's territory and occupy even more territory. The Luoshui divine kingdom is vast and rich in resources. We will definitely be able to strengthen our forces. Seeing the excitement in the crowd, and you stood up and stood up. He waved his hand and ordered in a vigorous voice, "I will give you half a month." Chapter 2396. Currently, the Heaven Punisher's territory was split into 3. The 72 cities, the Pillar of Heaven's mountain, and the 5 regions in the south of North Underworld Mountain. And you guarded Pillar of Heaven's mountain while General Dragon subduing guarded the 72 cities. The 5 regions in North Underworld Mountain were almost emptied of resources and did not have much value. Only 10 black-armored warriors were left to guard them. After Anu gave the order, the captains quickly returned to their own territories and selected soldiers from the slaves. At the same time, in each of the 72 cities, slaves were also being selected and soldiers were being recruited. After the news spread, it caused a huge commotion and chaos in the various cities. Billions of people knew that the Heaven Punisher was gathering an army to attack a god nation. The martial artists and commoners who were recruited would definitely become cannon fodder and die on the battlefield. Hence, the slaves and commoners in the various cities rebelled and defected. However, under the brutal suppression of the Heaven Punisher, the chaos was quelled in a few days. In just 10 days, the army was gathered. The 72 cities and Pillar of Heaven's mountain each gathered 5 million soldiers to listen to the orders of the Heaven Punisher. Anu was very pleased that the soldiers had completed the mission ahead of time. On the morning of the 12th day, he personally led the army out. He had 18 captains under him and only 6 were left to guard Pillar of Heaven's mountain. The other 12 captains each led over 400,000 soldiers. They followed him to the south and headed straight for the border of Luoshui God Nation. Almost at the same time, General Dragon subduing led 13 captains and 5 million soldiers to the northern border of Luoshui God Nation. The army set out. Everywhere they passed, mountains and rivers shook, and killing intent filled the air. A destructive disaster was about to befall Luoshui God Nation. The 15th day. North of Luoshui God Nation, within the Empire of White Frost, Yenqing City. A few days ago, it was still autumn. The ancient trees inside and outside the city were golden, and countless leaves fell from the autumn wind. However, after one night, the temperature plummeted. When the sun rose, the commoners in the city were shocked to see that it was snowing. It was snowing heavily, and the cold wind howled. Yenqing City, which had a radius of 200 miles, became a city covered in snow. It was a scene of extreme coldness. The commoners were so cold that their hands and feet were tied. They hurried to make winter clothes. The soldiers on duty both inside and outside the city walls were still wearing unlined clothes and armor. Their bodies were covered in snow and ice, and all of them had shrunken expressions. Such abnormal weather caused the commoners to discuss and make wild guesses. Within the city lord's mansion, the city lord also hurriedly gathered his advisors and generals to urgently discuss military matters. They were not talking about the weather change, but about the 72 cities and the gathering of the army at Tianzhu Mountain. Holy Emperor Bai Shuang had already issued an imperial edict to remind the cities of the northern frontier to be on guard against the invasion of the heaven-punishing race. Yanqing City was one of the most important nodes and strongholds in the northern defense line. When the Devil Race's army attacked the Luo River God Nation, Yanqing City was breached and destroyed in the flames of war. After the war ended, hundreds of thousands of craftsmen and commoners spent a few months to restore Yanqing City to its original state. After receiving the imperial edict, Yanqing City Lord began to strengthen his vigilance. Not only had the number of soldiers doubled, but many new fortifications had also been built. However, the sudden snowstorm last night made Yanqing City Lord sense danger and murderous intent. He had a bad feeling about this. He was afraid that the army of the Heaven Punishers had arrived. Just as expected. While the mayor of Yanqing City was discussing the military situation with his advisors and generals, an armored messenger guard rushed into the meeting hall with a panicked look on his face. Report. Urgent report. The messenger rushed into the hall in the wind and snow. He knelt down and reported, "My lord, 300 miles north of the city, an army of unknown origin has been discovered. They are rushing over." Upon hearing this news, Yanqing City Lord, his advisors, and the generals' expressions changed. They all stood up in unison. Yanqing City Lord's face was gloomy. He looked at the sky outside the hall and muttered in a low voice, "It should be them. I didn't expect them to come so quickly." After he finished speaking, he looked at the messenger guard with a burning gaze and asked, "Did the scouts see the banners and numbers of that army clearly?" The messenger replied respectfully, "My lord, they don't have a flag. There is a huge black flying boat in front of the army. As for the number of the army, the scouts estimate that there are about 400,000 of them." Yanqing City Lord's face turned even uglier. He said with a murderous aura, "A huge black flying boat? Then it must be the Heaven Punishers. Immediately pass down the order. All the soldiers rush to the city wall and activate the defensive array to defend against the invaders. Also, prepare the city for war. All the martial artists gather and wait for my orders." A few advisors and 2 generals bowed and said yes. Then, they quickly left to pass down the order. Yanqing City Lord also left the hall and returned to his residence. He put on his golden armor and took out his sword. He gathered his descendants and disciples. Then, he led hundreds of guards and rushed to the north gate to prepare to fight the enemy. Soon, the horn for emergency alert resounded throughout the city. Tens of thousands of soldiers rushed to the city wall with their spears and halberds. The people in the city were also awakened. They quickly put aside the things in front of them and took out their weapons to prepare to fight the enemy. Just as the city was in a state of panic, a muffled rumbling sound came from the sky to the north of the city. The sound shook the sky and was as dull as thunder. It made people's hearts tremble. The mountains outside the city were shaking. The ground within a few hundred miles was also shaking. Everyone knew that it was the sound and movement of the thousands of soldiers and horses advancing. In an instant, the faces of countless people and soldiers turned pale. Their eyes were filled with fear. The loud rumbling sound outside the city quickly approached. The wind and snow became even more violent. Soon, a huge black shadow quickly approached the north gate of Yanqing City. Yanqing City Lord and tens of thousands of soldiers looked up at the sky. They saw that the huge black shadow was a black battleship that was thousands of feet long. It was as huge as a mountain. Its appearance was sharp and fierce. It was mysterious and cold. Invisibly, the battleship released a force that could suppress the heavens and the earth. It enveloped the entire Yanqing city. Instantly, the entire city seemed to be frozen. Everyone felt a bone-chilling coldness. It was as if their blood was about to be frozen. Their dermic powers weakened rapidly. Such a change caused all the people and soldiers in the city to be terrified. They trembled with fear. Yanqing city lord's face turned ugly. He felt hopeless. Is the Heaven Punisher tribe really so powerful? The enemy general has not even shown himself. He only released an invisible force, and he wants to suppress the entire city. How should we fight this battle? Chapter 2397. 100 breaths later, an earth-shattering explosion approached. Crowds of human martial artists appeared on the mountain range 100 miles north of the city. An army numbering in the hundreds of thousands was like a multicolored tide, surging from the mountain range. In the sky, there were more than 100 black-armored, four-hoofed foreign race elites. They looked strange, but their bodies were huge. Their auras were terrifyingly powerful. They were the black-armored warriors of the Heaven Punishers. Soon, more than 100 Heaven Punishers led an army of 400,000 and arrived outside the city. They formed a formation on the wasteland. Yanqing city was in chaos. It was as if a pot had exploded. Whether it was the ordinary citizens or the soldiers guarding the city, they were all intimidated by the army of the Heaven Punishers. They were all terrified. The two sides had not started fighting, but Yanqing city's fighting spirit had already been shaken. The Yanqing city lord took a deep breath. Cold air entered his lungs and cleared his mind. He stepped into the sky, looking at the battleship in the sky through the five-colored Great City Protecting Array. He shouted, "Who are you? Tell me your name." "This is Yanqing City. It is under the rule of the Luoshui Divine Nation. It is the territory of the White Frost Empire. Anyone who dares to invade will be killed without mercy." The Yanqing city lord shouted in a deep voice. He held a golden sword in his right hand and pointed it at the thousands of soldiers outside the city. At this moment, his back was as tall as a mountain, and he exuded a domineering aura. The soldiers and commoners in the city calmed down when they saw the Yanqing city lord's bravery. However, the Heaven Punisher captain in the battleship did not even bother to respond. He did not even show his face. The battleship slowly adjusted its angle and aimed its side at the north gate. Crack! 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 The heavy metal bars on the side of the battleship opened, revealing a row of black cannons. In the next instant, more than 30 dark red light beams shot out of the cannons and rained down on the north gate. Boom! 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 Instantly, an earth-shattering rumble exploded and echoed through the sky. The five-colored protective array was as fragile as paper under the attack of the dark red light beams. It instantly collapsed. With the north gate as the center, the city walls, houses, and buildings within a 30-mile radius were all blasted into dust. The loud noise reverberated endlessly, and smoke and dust covered the sky, not dissipating for a long time. The entire Yanqing city started to shake violently. Dense cracks appeared on the ground. Tens of thousands of houses, palaces, and streets were destroyed by the shockwave, collapsing into ruins. Naturally, the thousands of soldiers at the north gate, including the lord of Yanqing city and the guards, were all killed. There were also more than 70,000 civilians who had been reduced to ashes under the bombardment. Not even their corpses remained intact. Such an apocalyptic scene frightened all the people in the city. Everyone's fighting spirit, faith, and courage collapsed instantly. In his mind, there was only endless fear and panic. The city was filled with heart-wrenching screams, roars of terror and despair, and cries of panic and helplessness. Nearly 1 million civilians abandoned their homes and fled to the South City Gate. They wanted to leave Yanqing City. At this time, the 400,000 soldiers outside the city rushed into the city and began to intercept and kill. Those who tried to escape from Yanqing City were all mercilessly slaughtered. The defending soldiers who were fighting like trapped beasts were also surrounded and attacked by the army. The various large clans and forces in the city gathered many martial artists to resist, but they were unable to escape and were quickly extinguished. Yanqing City was in complete chaos. There were saber lights and sword shadows everywhere. Cold light shot everywhere, blood splattered, and body parts fell to the ground. Countless corpses piled up like mountains. Warm blood spilled on the snow, melting the ice and flowing like a small stream. This was not a war. This was a one-sided massacre. The 400,000 soldiers of the Heaven Punisher race were all human martial artists recruited from the 72 cities. They could not bear to kill the civilians of Yanqing City. Their consciences were tortured and tortured. However, their lives were in the hands of the Heaven Punisher race, and they had to follow their orders. In just half an hour, Yanqing City had fallen into enemy hands. After more than 200,000 people died, the civilians and martial artists of Yanqing City gave up resisting and running away. The entire city was surrounded by the army. It was impossible to escape. The chaos of war subsided. The Heaven Punisher race successfully took over the city and set up a new defensive array. More than 1 million civilians were trapped in the city and became the slaves of the Heaven Punisher race. The captain of the army sat in the city lord's residence and used Yanqing City as a temporary camp. After 2 days of rest, the captain led dozens of soldiers and an army of 300,000 to attack a nearby city. A similar scene was playing out in the northern border of the Luoshui Divine Nation. In just 2 days, more than 40 cities on the northern border's defense line had fallen. These cities were like Yanqing City. They were strongholds on the northern border's defense line and were used to defend against foreign invasions. Unfortunately, these so-called strongholds could not withstand a single blow from the Heaven Punisher race's army. Half a month passed quickly. On this evening, the setting sun was as red as blood. In the imperial capital of the White Frost Empire, in the majestic and dignified imperial palace, the dignified and elegant Saint Emperor's study. Lu Baishuang, who was dressed in a golden dragon robe with cloud patterns and a golden crown with jade inlaid on her head, was bent over the table and writing rapidly to deal with urgent military matters. On the red sandalwood table in front of her, there were at least 100 memorials and letters piled up into a small mountain. Ever since the Heaven Punisher race had invaded, she had received several hundred memorials and letters every day, and she had to read them as quickly as possible. As a result, she had been sitting at the table for half a month, not leaving the study at all. In this period of time, besides reading memorials, she had also gathered her advisors to discuss military matters. Half a month of hard work had exhausted her, and her face was filled with worry and lethargy. At this moment, 2 burly middle-aged men in golden armor strode into the study. The 2 of them stood side by side and respectfully bowed to Lu Baishuang. They said in unison, "This general, Xia Wen, Zhonglin, greets Lord Saint Emperor." These 2 golden armor generals were Xia Wen and Zhonglin. When Ji Tianqing had gone to the northern border to fight against the demon race, he had been stationed at Heavenly Lion Pass for a long time. During that time, Lu Baishuang had sent Xia Wen and Zhonglin to serve as Ji Tianqing's deputies. Ji Tianqing had placed these 2 in important positions and had performed many meritorious deeds with him. After the chaos of the demon race had been quelled, the 2 of them had been rewarded and conferred titles by Lu Baishuang. Hearing their voices, Lu Baishuang put down the memorials and royal brush. She nodded with a dignified expression. "You 2 may rise. Quickly report the situation at the front lines." Xia Wen cupped his hands and said in a heavy tone, "Lord Saint Emperor, the war has already broken out for half a month, and the situation is gradually becoming clearer. The Heaven Punisher race has gathered an army of 10 million soldiers in the 72 cities and Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Chapter 2398. The Heaven Punisher had led an army of 10 million and had come aggressively. The White Frost Empire was not the only empire that had been invaded. The Changlong Empire and the Red Sun Empire had also been invaded. After all, these three empires were in the northernmost part of the Divine Kingdom. They were closest to the Divine Ruins, the Pillar of Heaven's Mountain, the 72 cities, and the North Underworld Mountain. When the demon race had invaded, they had also invaded the three empires. That war had brought a great disaster to the three empires. Hundreds of millions of people had been killed, and billions of people had lost their homes. Only a year had passed, and the three empires had yet to recover. The people had yet to walk out of the heavy suffering. Who would have thought that the Heaven Punisher would invade again and burn the land with the flames of war? In just half a month, more than 200 cities had been lost on the northern battlefront of the three empires. At least 50 million people had died in the war. More than 100 million people had fled their homes. During this time, Liu Baishuang had received countless war reports every day. She had a thorough understanding of the situation in the north of the empire. However, when she heard Xia Wen's report and learned that the situation in the three empires was the same, her heart still skipped a beat. After Xia Wen finished his report, the study fell silent. The atmosphere was heavy and oppressive. Liu Baishuang frowned and said in a low voice, "The cruel and tyrannical Heaven Punisher is indeed plotting against the entire Divine Kingdom." Many Heaven Punishers led an army of 10 million to attack the northern border of the Divine Kingdom. The three empires could not withstand them. They are even more ferocious than the demon race's army. Zhong Lin cupped his hands and said in a heavy tone, "Lord Saint Emperor, the three empires have yet to recover from the demon race's chaos, and now they are being invaded by the Heaven Punisher. There are rumors among the people that if the heavens do not protect the Luoshui Divine Kingdom, this war will." Liu Baishuang frowned and shouted angrily with cold eyes, "Bastard! The survival of the empire is in front of us. Who dares to spread such disgraceful rumors? We cannot allow those bastards to mislead the people and affect the morale of the army. Once they are discovered, they must be severely punished." Zhong Lin quickly bowed and cupped his hands. "Yes, Lord." Xia Wen continued, "Lord Saint Emperor, the front lines are retreating. No one can stop the Heaven Punisher's army." It was said that each Heaven Punishing race's army had 400,000 soldiers, and their commander was a deity realm expert. The battleship's cannons could easily destroy any city. An expert with such strength was definitely not someone that the soldiers could resist. "I'm afraid only the Divine Master will be able to fend off the experts of the Heaven Punisher race," Liu Baishuang said solemnly. The moment the battle started, the deity master received the news. Even if the Divine Master hasn't shown herself yet, she must have her own considerations and plans. You can't criticize her. Furthermore, the Heaven-destroying clan's army of 10 million was divided into 25 armies. Each army had a martial god, a battleship, hundreds of martial sage realm warriors in black armor, and 400,000 soldiers. Only the entire Luoshui Divine Kingdom would be able to withstand such a powerful attack. This time, I'm afraid the fate of Scandinavia will really be. Alas. Speaking to her, she could not help but sigh and reveal a helpless expression. Xia Wen and Zhong Lin looked at each other and cupped their fists. At the same time, they said, "Lord Sage Emperor, you have to make plans. The Heaven-destroying clan's army is unstoppable. Once they invade half of our country and threaten the imperial capital, you have to retreat." Liu Baishuang looked at the two of them with a solemn gaze and said sternly, "Retreat? Where can we retreat to? The Heaven-destroying clan's army's target is the entire Luoshui Divine Kingdom. Even if we retreat to the southernmost part of the Divine Kingdom, we won't be able to escape death. Since this empire of white frost was created by me, I will live and die with it." Xia Wen and Zhong Lin were stunned and wanted to persuade her further. However, Liu Baishuang had already made up her mind. She waved her hand and gestured for the two of them to leave. The two of them could only bow and take their leave. Then, they rushed back to the northern border and led the army to kill the enemy. As time passed, the situation in the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom became more and more dangerous. The heaven-destroying clan continued to move southward. They conquered dozens of cities every day and continued to expand their territory. Wherever the army went, not a single city could stop them. With a battleship at the front, they only needed to fire once to break through the city's defenses. Then, hundreds of black-armored soldiers led the 400,000-strong army into the city and quickly took over the entire city. It only took 6 hours for a main city that could hold 2 million people to fall from the moment it was attacked. In the beginning, when the cities were invaded, the city lords and the soldiers defending the cities would fight with all their might. The commoners in the cities were united against a common enemy and fought back without fear of death. However, when the heaven-destroying clan's army used ruthless methods to quickly kill hundreds of thousands of people, the entire city collapsed. Later on, the heaven-destroying clan took over more and more cities, and the related news spread throughout the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom. When the soldiers and commoners of the various cities learned of the heaven-destroying clan's terrifying strength and methods, they lost their fighting spirit and will to fight. After all, resisting and fighting back would only lead to death. If they obediently admitted defeat and surrendered, they could still keep their lives. The cultivators and commoners who were unwilling to surrender and become slaves of the heaven-destroying clan had fled before the heaven-destroying clan's army arrived. For a time, a large number of refugees appeared in the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom, and they all fled toward the south. The total number of refugees in the three empires reached hundreds of millions, and they rushed toward the south like a flood. Under such circumstances, the entire Luo Shui Divine Kingdom was in a state of panic. Wherever the heaven-destroying clan's army went, the cities opened their gates and surrendered, allowing the heaven-destroying clan to invade. As such, the only thing that could restrict the heaven-destroying clan's expansion was the speed at which they took over a city. Unknowingly, a month passed. Half of the White Frost, Scarlet Sun, and Qianlong empires had fallen. At this rate, the three empires would be completely conquered in half a month. That evening, the imperial capital of the White Frost Empire, Lu Baishuang, who wore a white dress and a white jade phoenix crown, stood at the peak of the imperial palace. She faced the biting cold northern wind and looked down at the capital city with an indifferent expression. The sky was dark, and a blood-red sun hung on the horizon, appearing and disappearing through the thick clouds. The once dazzling and prosperous imperial capital had now become desolate, with fallen leaves and snow all over the city. The heaven-destroying clan's army had charged into the wastelands north of the city last night. As such, more than half of the 3 million commoners in the imperial capital had evacuated a few days ago. Currently, only 500,000 commoners were left in the imperial capital. These commoners were old, weak, sick, and disabled. Even if they fled, they would die on the road. They could not leave their homeland and would rather die with the imperial capital. Chapter 2399. Once the flames of war spread, the city became desolate. 600 years of homeland, millions of miles of mountains and rivers. The Phoenix Pavilion and the Dragon Pavilion connected to the heavens, jade trees and jade branches like smoke, how could they have known war? Lu Baishuang stood at the peak of the imperial palace, facing the biting cold north wind as she muttered in a lonely voice. The cold wind was like a knife, blowing up her white dress and her fine black hair to flutter in the wind. Her slender and weak body was like a sharp sword that stood between the heavens and the earth. No matter how the dark clouds from the north rolled over, she did not yield. She was not afraid of war or death. She was sad because the Heaven Punisher race was powerful and the Luo Shui divine nation was doomed. She could not do anything about the destruction of her country and the destruction of her family. How many times had she missed that peerlessly handsome young master whose robes fluttered in the wind? Yet, he still hadn't appeared. She knew that even if that young master came, he would not be able to turn the tide. But she still hid a trace of obsession in her heart. If she could see that person one more time before she died, she would have no regrets even if she died on the battlefield. At this moment, muffled rumbling sounds came from the north. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers surged toward the capital like a surging tide. But Lu Baishuang was not distracted. She ignored the murderous army and sank into her memories. She remembered that when the demon race invaded the kingdom of Baishuang, that young master was ordered by the divine master to go to the Sky Lion Pass to participate in the war. There, she met him for the first time. Lu Baishuang, you have been staring at me for an hour. Haven't you seen enough? I heard that you are not married and do not have a partner. Could it be that you have feelings for me? Young Master Ji, please respect yourself. Do not speak nonsense. That's right. I was afraid that you would be infatuated with me and have a crush on me. After all, I already have a family. You. Ji Tianqing. You egomaniac. Do you think this emperor will like you? Don't think too highly of yourself. This emperor does not like you at all. The conversation between the two of them when they first met lingered in Lu Baishuang's mind, lingering and becoming clearer. He even remembered the scene and the tone of his voice clearly, as if it had just happened yesterday. As she recalled this, Lu Baishuang's frosty expression softened. The corners of her mouth curled into a faint smile as she muttered to herself, hateful egomaniac, you've won in the end. If you knew the answer, you would definitely be narcissistic and proud. However, after tonight, there would be no more white frost in the world. In the end, I am just a passerby. As soon as she finished speaking, she gathered her thoughts and looked towards the north with a cold and sharp gaze. Clang! Light flashed in his right hand, and a silver-white holy sword appeared. She held the sacred sword in her hand, and her clothes fluttered in the wind. Her entire body was bursting with a soaring fighting spirit. Those who offend the empire shall die. Her body turned into a ray of white light as she charged toward the heaven-destroying army in the north. At that instant it was as if lightning had torn apart the night sky, causing the heavens and the earth to light up. After a short while, an earth-shattering battle broke out in the wilderness outside the capital. A colorful radiance of magic power shone, illuminating half of the sky. An earth-shattering sound reverberated in the sky. There were also deafening shouts, explosions, and cries of agony. The martial saint was enraged, and the heaven-destroying army suffered heavy casualties. Everything within a radius of a few hundred miles was affected. However, this was only the final radiance of the meteor before it fell. Not long after, a heaven-destroying elite cultivator in silver armor walked out of the pitch-black warship in the sky. This person stood at the bow of the warship and looked down coldly at the battlefield. He suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Whoosh! A dark red giant sword that was thousands of feet long slashed down as if it could split the heavens and earth. It instantly drowned the meteor. Bam! A loud sound reverberated, shaking the heavens. The meteor instantly collapsed, turning into dust that covered the sky and scattered on the wilderness outside the capital. She was born in this land and had risen in the wind and rain. In the end, she stepped onto the throne and controlled this land. In the end, she had lived and died with the empire and returned to this land. Half an hour later, the pitch-black warship blasted open the northern gate of the capital, and the 400,000 heaven-destroying soldiers charged in. The 50,000 soldiers guarding the city were all old, weak, sick, and disabled. They could not resist for long before they were slaughtered by the army. The 500,000 civilians in the city had expected such an outcome. They were so sad that their hearts had given up and did not resist. 4 hours later, the capital of the White Frost Empire had completely fallen and was under the control of the heaven-destroying race. The army stationed themselves in the capital and used it as their base camp. In just 2 days, 3 more armies had gathered. A total of 1.6 million people guarded the capital. After the news spread, the entire White Frost Empire mourned, and their will to resist dissipated. The many main cities south of the capital fell into chaos. Countless people abandoned their cities and fled. Many city lords and generals decided to open their cities and surrender. The heaven-destroying race had killed sacred Emperor White Frost and taken over the capital, causing the empire to fall apart. It would soon fall completely. At this moment, God Lord Luo Shui appeared out of nowhere. This was the first time she had appeared since the start of the war with the heaven-destroying race. No one knew what she had been doing in the past month. All they knew was that she had appeared in the capital of the White Frost Empire. After a heaven-shaking battle, she had slain 2 of the 3 martial god captains guarding the capital. One of them was the culprit who had killed Lu Baishuang. The battle had destroyed the dazzling imperial palace and reduced half of the capital to rubble. More than 200,000 soldiers of the heaven-destroying race had been wiped out. The surviving captain managed to escape from the capital alone, and only then did he manage to escape death. God Lord Luo Shui had then used a supreme technique to destroy the entire capital, reducing it to rubble. There was no doubt that the 1.6 million soldiers of the heaven-destroying race garrisoned in the city had all been killed. Even the 500,000 civilians in the city had been reduced to dust. When this news spread, it shocked all of the Luo Shui divine kingdom. Everyone said that the rage of a god lord could shatter the heavens and earth. God Lord Luo Shui's actions were both to avenge Lu Baishuang and to deal a heavy blow to the heaven-destroying race. It was also a warning to those spineless people who had surrendered. As a result, the city lords and generals of the southern cities who wanted to flee and surrender had to think twice. The mighty divine might of the Luo Shui martial god roused the fighting spirit of countless soldiers and martial artists, and they once more became energetic and hot-blooded. After the battle for the capital of the White Frost Empire concluded, the Luo Shui martial god vanished without a trace. Several days later, she appeared on the battlefield of the Changlong Empire and personally killed an army. After a bloody battle, she had killed more than 200,000 soldiers and several dozen black-armored soldiers. The commander of the army had been killed and the warship destroyed, turning it into a pile of scrap metal. Those who were lucky enough to survive could only scatter in all directions and join up with the rest of the army. When this news spread, it once more shocked the world. Chapter 2400. For the next 2 months, the Luo Shui martial god appeared on the battlefield. Her whereabouts were mysterious and erratic, making it difficult for others to grasp. However, every time she appeared, she would deliver a thunderous blow. She would either kill a martial god captain or destroy a warship. Or she would destroy the camp of the heaven-punishing army and kill hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Such a mysterious and unfathomable method of destroying the world caused the heaven-punishing race's army to tremble in fear. The soldiers and martial artists of the Luo Shui divine kingdom saw the dawn of victory and became spirited. They tried their best to resist the enemy's invasion. As a result, the heaven-punishing army had no choice but to slow down their attacks and withdraw their defenses. This was to restore morale and to prevent the Luo Shui martial god's sudden attack. The captains did not dare to act alone. They had to gather in groups of 4 or 5 to feel safe. And Yu cursed angrily for a long time when he saw that his attack plan was blocked. He even ordered a massacre. In order to take revenge on the Luo Shui martial god, he ordered his army to kill millions of civilians in every city they conquered to pressure the Luo Shui martial god. At the same time, General Dragon Subduing was furious when he heard the news and personally went to kill Luo Shui. As a result, these 2 months became the darkest period. The Luo Shui divine kingdom suffered unprecedented destruction. Hundreds of cities were destroyed and at least 300 million civilians were killed. The territories of the White Frost Empire and the Changlong Empire were shrouded in bloody rain for a long time. The Luoshui martial gods' whereabouts were constantly exposed, and the situation became more and more dangerous. There were a few times when she was almost caught by General Dragon subduing. As a result, she could only hide and deal with General Dragon subduing. She was unwilling to face him head-on. While she was being held back, the heaven-punishing tribe's army once again invaded the south. Very quickly, they conquered one city after another. At this time, 20 mysterious armies joined the battlefield and blocked the heaven-punishing army. These mysterious armies were clearly the elites of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. Each army had about 50,000 people, and their strength and battle skills were very high. They were proficient in guerrilla warfare and skirmish tactics. They did not face the heaven-punishing army head-on. They only attacked and harassed. As a result, they successfully delayed the heaven-punishing army's attack and caused the heaven-punishing army to be greatly troubled. After a dozen battles, the heaven-punishing army gradually understood the identity of the mysterious army. They were well-trained, elite, and had millions of people. Only the Divine Guard army of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom matched these characteristics. The Divine Guard Corps was the sharp blade and sturdy shield that protected the Divine Nation. They were also the last force of the Divine Nation. Even the Divine Guard Legion had been mobilized. It was clear that the Luoshui Divine Nation was at the end of its tether. Within the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda, the 6th level of the dark space. The situation on Shinwu continent was unstable, and the Luoshui Divine Kingdom was being ravaged by the flames of war. However, the interior of the Divine Pagoda was an otherworldly land and was not affected in the slightest. Only 2 months had passed in the outside world, but Ji Tianqing had already spent 8 years in the distorted spacetime. In the past 8 years, he had continuously cast spells to control the 9th Heaven Cauldron and refine the Burial of Heaven sword. That crude sword embryo had long since turned into an ancient, clumsy, mysterious, and heavy black ancient sword. The body of the sword was narrow, long, and exquisite. It was covered in mysterious markings that formed 81 boundlessly vast divine diagrams that contained the profundities of the 9 heavens and 9 earth. The refining materials that Ji Tianqing had put into the cauldron had all been refined, leaving only some residue. The Burial of Heaven sword had finally been reborn and had returned to the ranks of divine artifacts. Ji Tianqing had been refining the Burial of Heaven sword for 14 years. It could no longer be described as tiring or exhausting. It was truly exhausting and tormenting. It seemed simple, but casting spells day after day was more dangerous than fighting thousands of battles. Of course, this was also a great training and improvement for him. His martial arts foundation and strength had also been strengthened and improved. He had silently broken through to the 9th level of the martial sage realm. On this day, Ji Tianqing finished casting his spells. After he retracted his palms, the 9th Heaven Cauldron also gradually stopped revolving. The flickering golden light quickly retracted. Within the Divine Cauldron, the surging divine flames gradually extinguished. Buzz! The Burial of Heaven sword that was floating within the divine flames seemed to have awakened. It shook violently and let out a joyful sword cry. Whoosh! The divine cauldron opened, and a dark golden divine flame rushed into the sky. The Burial of Heaven sword also flew out of the divine cauldron. It was wrapped in blazing golden flames and flew a few rounds around Ji Tianqing. Finally, when the golden divine flame extinguished, the Burial of Heaven sword had shrunk to 4 feet and returned to Ji Tianqing's hands. This is great. I have finally returned to the godly realm. I can roam the world and dominate the universe. The Burial of Heaven's voice rang in Ji Tianqing's mind. His tone was excited and his blood was boiling. Ji Tianqing's right hand held the sword hilt that still had some warmth. His left hand caressed the pitch-black blade as his eyes shone brightly. That's right. We have waited for this day for too long. The divine sword has returned. Once I break through to the godly realm, I will truly dominate the world and be invincible. The burial of heaven reminded again, although I have returned to the godly realm, I am currently only a low-grade void god artifact. I can barely deal with the battleships of the Heaven Slayer race. If you want to destroy the battleships like cutting vegetables, you have to recover to the middle grade. The materials of the battleships are not bad. After refining them, they can greatly increase the strength of the sword. You should collect more in the future. Ji Tianqing nodded and said with a smile, of course. I will dismantle the dozens of battleships of the Heaven Slayer race sooner or later and refine the materials on the spot. Alright, it is still too early to talk about this. You should rest for a few years and recover your strength as soon as possible. I want to continue my seclusion and break through to the godly realm in one go. With that, he kept the burial of Heaven sword and the ninth heaven cauldron and sat in the dark sky to cultivate. As time passed, the speed of his strength increasing became slower and slower. After reaching the rank 9 martial sage realm, it was extremely difficult to increase his strength. Ordinary martial sages usually had to cultivate for a few hundred years before they could increase their cultivation by 1 rank. Even Wu Duantian, who was known as the strongest person below the martial god realm, had to cultivate in seclusion for 400 years before he broke through to the rank 9 martial sage realm. In order to increase his strength, Ji Tianqing had put in a lot of effort and tried all kinds of methods. Not only did he cultivate the rank 8 sword soul Dao, but he also cultivated the Paragon sword body, the Galaxy body refinement art, the heaven-piercing sword intent and various trump cards. Other than those divine skills and super skills that he could not cultivate due to his cultivation realm, he had cultivated all kinds of secret skills. As a result, the speed of his strength increasing was much faster. 14 years later. His strength had reached the complete rank 9 martial sage realm and he was only 1 step away from breaking through to the godly realm. However, he was stuck at the half step to the godly realm and could not advance any further. Even after 2 years of trying and breaking through, he was still unable to break through. Helplessly, he could only end his seclusion. He knew clearly that if he wanted to break through, it was not enough to just cultivate in seclusion. Chapter 2401. After finishing his seclusion, Ji Tianqing went to visit Yun Yao and Ji Ku. Thousands of miles away from him, Yun Yao was sitting in the void, cultivating in seclusion. Her whole body was surrounded by colorful lights, emitting a strong and heavy aura, which made her look extraordinarily divine. Ji Tianqing knew at a glance that she had also reached the peak of the 9th level of the martial saint realm, and her magic power had been condensed to the extreme. She was only 1 step away from transforming her magic power into divine power, and her Dharma body into a divine body, and she could break through to the God realm. However, it was this 1 step that shackled Yun Yao. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing sighed silently and woke her up with a sound transmission. After hearing his sound transmission, Yun Yao ended her cultivation and opened her eyes. Meeting Ji Tianqing's concerned gaze, she showed a regretful expression and said with a disappointed tone, "Tianqing, I failed." Ji Tianqing shook his head gently and comforted her, "Not only you, even I am stuck at the half-step God realm and can't break through. There are as many martial artists in the world as grains of sand, and only 1 in a billion can step into the God realm. How can it be so easy? In our current state, it's useless to continue cultivating in seclusion. We have to look for opportunities and opportunities." Yun Yao nodded and said with a frown, "I tried for 3 years, but I still couldn't break through to the God realm. However, I am sure that the divine pearl is my opportunity. If I can find another divine pearl, I will definitely break through." Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said solemnly, "Okay, then let's go and find the divine pearl." Yun Yao stood up and walked side by side with him. She had only taken 2 steps when she suddenly remembered something and stopped. "Right, we have been cultivating in seclusion for so many years. How is the situation in the continent?" Ji Tianxing calculated the time and said, "Previously, I spent 14 years to refine the burial of Heaven's sword before it became a divine artifact. After that, I cultivated in seclusion for another 16 years. We have been here for 30 years, but only 7 months have passed in the outside world. Even if the Heaven Punishers want to attack the Luo River Divine Kingdom, they won't be able to do it so quickly." Yunyao nodded slightly and lowered her head to look at her swollen belly. She said thoughtfully, "It's been 30 years, but Chen Chen and Yaya still show no signs of being born. How many years will it take for these two little fellows to be born?" Ji Tianxing held her hand and said with a smile, "The children have been in your womb for more than 40 years, and they are growing and becoming stronger quickly. If they were to be born after 100 years of gestation, they would definitely have an innate saint body, a natural martial saint. If he was born after 1,000 years, he would have an innate divine body and a natural martial god. A child with such aptitude might not even appear in the history of a great world for tens of thousands of years." Yunyao said in a gentle voice, "Although I really want to see them as soon as possible, if that's really the case, I'd rather have them gestate for 1,000 years and be born as gods. Don't be like us, who went through so many hardships in order to break through to the deity realm." Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded. He pulled her and flew into the darkness. Before coming out of seclusion, let's take a look at Ku's situation. After a while, the two of them flew in front of Ji Ku. Unexpectedly, Ji Ku had already come out of seclusion and was deep in thought with his eyes closed. She frowned and her face was filled with worry and confusion. It was obvious that she was in a dilemma. Ji Tianxing called out to her and she came to her senses. She quickly stood up and greeted him. "Brother Tianxing, eldest senior sister, why aren't you in seclusion?" Yunyao explained in a gentle voice, "We have already reached the half-step to the divine realm, but we are unable to break through. We can only come out of seclusion to look for opportunities." Ji Ku's face was filled with shock. He said in disbelief, "Oh my God! You have already reached the full circle of the martial saint realm and reached the half-step to the divine realm. This speed is too shocking. It's a pity that I have only reached the 7th level of the martial saint realm after inheriting the demon god's legacy. I have also been stuck in a bottleneck for the past 2 years and have not been able to find an answer. My strength has also stagnated." As she spoke, her beautiful face was filled with loneliness and regret. Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "You have inherited the legacy of the godly pagoda's owner. Only you can find the answer. Even I can't help you. However, I suggest that you stop your seclusion and come out with us. If you can find an opportunity and fortune, perhaps your confusion will be easily solved." Ji Ku nodded and agreed without hesitation, "All right. I will listen to Brother Tianxing and come out with you. Oh yes, although my strength has stagnated, I still have good news to tell you." "What good news?" Yunyao looked expectant. Ji Ku smiled mischievously and pointed at the dark space beneath his feet. He said, "This 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda has already been refined by me. It is connected to my soul and I have complete control over it. With just a thought, I can put the godly pagoda into my palm and leave the yin-yang mystic realm. I can carry it with me." Both Ji Tianxing and Yunyao were astonished, clicking their tongues in wonder. Ji Ku blinked and asked with a smile, "Why don't I show you how it works?" Ji Tianxing quickly waved his hand and dissuaded him, "No need. It is better to leave the godly pagoda in the mystic realm. It will not be discovered by outsiders and it can block the heavenly Tao's detection. In the future, when we are fighting against the Heaven Punishers, if we are in danger, we can escape here instantly. If we carry it with us, we will be surrounded by the Heaven Punishers even if we hide in the godly pagoda." Ji Ku was enlightened and nodded in agreement, "All right, then let's leave it as it is." The three of them chatted for a while more before they left the godly pagoda and appeared at the peak of a barren mountain outside the mystic realm. It was late at night and the moon was bright and there were few stars in the sky. The three of them stood on a huge rock at the peak of the mountain and looked towards the south. Ji Tianqing took out a communication jade slip and sent it to Luo Shui to ask about the situation on the continent and the Luo Shui divine nation. It had been half a year since the Heaven Punishers had invaded the Luo Shui divine nation. In this half a year, the Luo Shui divine nation had suffered greatly. After being ravaged by the flames of war, it was now in ruins and covered in corpses. Baishuang, Changlong, Qiang, and Tianwu had been conquered by the Heaven Punishers. Lu Baishuang had died in battle, the Changlong divine emperor had been killed, and the Qiang and Tianwu divine emperors had also died in battle. Even a few civilian martial sages had been killed by the Heaven Punishers in the chaotic battle. In this war that had engulfed half of the divine nation, 600 million civilians had died tragically at the hands of the Heaven Punishers. 2 billion civilians had become slaves of the Heaven Punishers and lived in darkness and despair. There were also a few 100 million civilians who had been forced to abandon their homes and flee to the 5 countries in the south, becoming refugees. Half of the Luo Shui divine nation had fallen. More than half of the 1 million divine guards had been sacrificed in the war. Only about 300,000 people were still bitterly holding on. The Heaven Punishers had temporarily stopped their expansion and defended the 4 countries in the north. They had begun to rest and consolidate their rear. After all, the Heaven Punishers' momentum had already been established. As long as they could firmly control half of the continent and replenish the army with new blood, they would soon be able to conquer the other 5 empires. Thus, the Heaven Punishers were fighting steadily and were not in a hurry. As for the citizens of the 5 empires in the south, although they were temporarily safe, they were also deeply pessimistic and despaired. Everyone's hearts were heavy, as if there was a guillotine hanging over their heads that would soon fall. Under such circumstances, the citizens of the Luo Shui divine nation were in a state of panic and unrest. The entire Shenwu continent was also affected, and everyone was in a state of panic. Turbulence was surging in the dark. The various major races and martial organizations were all fearful of the Heaven Punishers' strength. Countless people were worried. Once the Heaven Punishers conquered the Luo Shui divine nation, they would definitely conquer the entire Shenwu continent. What had happened to the Luo Shui divine nation today was the future of the various divine nations and organizations. Chapter 2402. Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Kukuk quietly stood at the peak of a barren mountain, waiting for Luoshui's reply. They had been in seclusion in the divine tower all this time, oblivious to the happenings of the world. They did not know about the situation on the Shenwu continent, nor did they know what had happened to the Luo Shui divine kingdom. Until, a ray of spiritual light flew over from the horizon and landed in Ji Tianqing's palm. Whoosh! After the spiritual light dissipated, a sparkling and translucent jade slip appeared. It had been sent back by Luo Shui. Ji Tianqing released his divine sense and entered it, beginning to read the information within. After just a few sentences, his expression changed drastically, and he frowned. When he finished reading the information in the jade slip, his expression was gloomy, and a cold glint flickered in his eyes. Seeing his strange expression, Yun Yao and Ji Ku revealed concerned expressions and hurriedly asked about it. Tianqing, what happened? Brother Tianqing, did something happen to the Luo Shui divine kingdom? Ji Tianqing nodded and explained in a heavy tone, Luo Shui sent a message saying that the Heaven Punisher has gathered an army of 10 million in the 72 cities and Tianzhu mountain. Half a year ago, the Heaven Punisher led an army of 10 million and began to attack the Luo Shui divine kingdom. He told Yun Yao and Ji Ku the contents of the jade slip in full detail. After listening, the two of them had a clear understanding of the situation on the continent and the Luo Shui divine kingdom. The two of them also frowned, and their eyes were filled with anger and worry. The Luo Shui divine kingdom is really unfortunate. Not long ago, it was invaded by the demon race's army and was ravaged by the flames of war. Who would have thought that not long after, it would be invaded by the Heaven Punisher's army again. In just half a year, half of the Luo Shui divine kingdom has fallen. How powerful is the Heaven Punisher's army? Ji Tianqing looked towards the south with a burning gaze and said in a low voice, half of the Luo Shui divine kingdom's territory has been invaded, and only the 5 empires in the south are bitterly holding on. Luo Shui is being pursued by General Fu Long, and there is no chance for them to intercept the Heaven Punisher's army. According to the current situation, the Luo Shui divine kingdom would fall completely in a few months. No, we have to go help as soon as possible. Even if we can't stop the Heaven Punishing race's army, we must try to delay their advance. Yin Yao and Ji Ku both nodded in agreement. All right. I can't sit back and watch the Luo Shui holy nation be invaded. Otherwise, the Heaven Punishers will become even more powerful, and no one will be able to stop them. After that, Yin Yao summoned the glazed fire dragon and flew towards the south with Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku. Within the Heaven Absolute God Nation. In the depths of the magnificent and majestic divine palace. Early in the morning, the secret chamber where martial god Tianju was cultivating in seclusion suddenly emitted a golden glow and a magnificent aura. The door of the secret chamber slowly opened. Martial god Tianjue, who was wearing a golden dragon robe and a crown on his head, walked out in a majestic manner. After close to a year of closed-door recuperation, his injuries had finally healed, and his mental state had also recovered to its peak. Not only was he surrounded by a mysterious aura, but he also exuded a formless pressure. He had regained his previous majestic and domineering aura. The commander of the Divine Guards, Lu Jin, was already waiting outside the secret chamber. Seeing martial god Tianjue appear, Lu Jin quickly went forward and bowed respectfully. Your subordinate, Lu Jin, greets the Divine Master. Martial god Tianjue glanced at him and waved his hand. You may rise. As he spoke, he stepped into the dark passageway and walked towards the study. Lu Jin, I've been in seclusion for close to a year. Did anything major happen during this time? Martial god Tianjue was just asking casually. He mainly wanted to understand the situation of the Heaven Absolute God Nation. For example, did Luo Shui and Pillar of Heaven's mountains take revenge? However, Lu Jin's face was filled with joy, and he said excitedly, Divine Master, half a year ago, something major did happen on the continent. And that shocking event is a joyous occasion for us. Martial god Tianjue immediately stopped in his tracks, his eyes filled with anticipation. He asked, Oh. What joyous occasion is it? Lu Jin explained with a smile, about 8 months ago, the Heaven Punishing tribe destroyed Pillar of Heaven's mountains and invaded its territory. Then, the Heaven Punishing tribe gathered an army of 10 million in the 72 cities and Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Hearing this, martial god Tianjue was shocked. He asked in disbelief, the Heaven Punishing tribe army? Destroyed Pillar of Heaven's mountains? What about Ji Tianqing? Is he dead? Was he killed by the Heaven Punishing tribe? Lu Jin was stunned. He shook his head and said, This. I don't know. I only know that Pillar of Heaven's mountains has been reduced to ruins. Ji Tianqing has never appeared again. Martial god Tianjue was slightly disappointed. He frowned and said, Continue. Lu Jin continued to report, half a year ago, the Heaven Punishing tribe experts led an army of 10 million to wage war on the Luo Shui divine nation. In just half a year, the Heaven Punishing tribe army invaded the 4 empires and enslaved billions of people. The Luo Shui divine nation was devastated. At least 1 billion people and soldiers were killed by the Heaven Punishing tribe army. I heard that even the Divine Guard Legion of the Luo Shui divine nation suffered heavy casualties and is about to collapse. Martial god Tianjue was shocked again. He asked in disbelief, in just half a year, the Heaven Punishing tribe army invaded half of the Luo Shui divine nation. The Heaven Punishing tribe is so powerful. Even Luo Shui can't stop them. Lu Jin's smile became even brighter. He said with joy, of course. According to the information I found, Luo Shui is being hunted down by the heaven-punishing tribe leader. She can't even protect herself now. How can she care about the lives of the divine nation's people? Martial god Tianjue also smiled coldly. He nodded and said, "This is great news." Haha, Luo Shui has always been cold and arrogant. I really want to see her being hunted down and fleeing in all directions. As he spoke, he stepped into the study and sat on the purple jade throne. Lu Jin stood in front of the table and said respectfully, "Lord God, Luo Shui is a thorn in your side. Haven't you always wanted to get rid of her? Now that the Luo Shui divine nation is about to be destroyed and she is being hunted down by the heaven-punishing tribe, she can't even take care of herself. Isn't this the best time for you to kill her?" Martial god Tianjue immediately fell silent. The gloating smile on his face gradually disappeared, and his expression became gloomy. Seeing his reaction, Lu Jin was shocked. He felt anxious and hurriedly knelt down to apologize. "Lord God, please calm down. I didn't think carefully and boldly overstepped my boundaries. Please punish me." Martial god Tianjue frowned. His expression was solemn as he said in a low voice, "Lu Jin, now that Luo Shui has fallen to such a state, I am naturally gloating. However, the heaven-punishing tribe is an invader from the outside world. They are far more ferocious and powerful than the demons. If they successfully invade the Luo Shui divine nation and strengthen their forces, it is inevitable that their ambitions will swell and they will take over the entire Shenwu continent." Chapter 2403. Martial god Tianju's words made Lu Jin frown. After pondering for a moment, Lu Jin thought of some comforting words and hurriedly tried to persuade him. "Sir Divine Master, what you're saying is actually the concern of all the martial artists in the world. Currently, the entire continent is in a state of panic. All the divine kingdoms, races, and powers are in danger. It is widely rumored in the martial world that the heaven punishers are greedier and stronger than the demons. They will not be satisfied with just the Luo Shui divine kingdom's territory and will definitely invade the entire continent. However, I believe that these are groundless fears and delusions." Martial god Tianju raised his eyebrows and looked at him with a dignified gaze. He asked, "Oh. Why do you say that?" Lu Jin respectfully explained, "Sir Divine Master, for the past year, I have been inquiring about the heaven punishers and have even received their help." Martial god Tianju revealed an understanding expression when he heard the word "there," but he did not interrupt. Lu Jin continued, "According to what I know, the heaven punishers are all powerhouses, and even the most ordinary warrior is a martial saint. Every 100 martial saints are under the command of a captain, and the captains are all martial gods. From this, it sounds like the heaven punishers are very powerful, and the entire continent cannot compare to them. However, the heaven punishers' greatest flaw is that they have too few people. Thus, if they want to invade a wider territory, they can only enslave martial artists from various races. According to my estimates, there are no more than 5,000 heaven punishers and no more than 50 martial god captains." Without waiting for him to finish, martial god Tianju frowned and cursed, "Bastard. Dozens of martial gods and thousands of martial saints. The entire Shenwu continent's powerhouses added together are not even a tenth of the heaven punishers' powerhouses. You call that too few people? With so many powerhouses, it's enough to destroy the entire Five Elements realm." Lu Jin shrunk his neck from the scolding and explained with an embarrassed smile, "Sir Divine Master, please calm down. At first glance, it sounds like the heaven punishers have a lot of powerhouses. However, don't forget that the heaven punishers do not just kill and conquer. Their goal is to invade territory. In this way, they will have to leave behind a portion of their powerhouses to guard their territory and only send out a portion to invade cities. Moreover, in the process of war, the powerhouses of the Heaven Punishers will constantly be injured and weakened. He observed Martial God Tianju's reaction as he spoke. Seeing that Martial God Tianju was deep in thought, he continued, if the Heaven Punishers really take over the Luoshui Divine Kingdom, they will have to leave half of their people to guard their territory. If they wanted to invade other territories, the number of experts they could use would be even fewer. Therefore, you don't have to worry. At least, you don't have to worry about it in the short term. The Heaven Punisher race's attack is definitely not that fast. Martial God Tianju pondered for a moment and nodded, you're right, I'll continue to observe. Luo Shui is being hunted down by the leader of the Heaven Punishing race. I should not get involved for now. Actually, the person I want to kill the most is Ji Tianqing. As long as this person doesn't die, this god will feel like a fishbone is stuck in my throat, and I won't be able to eat or sleep in peace. Lu Jin hurriedly nodded and said indignantly, that's right. This person really deserved to die. The entire god's nation will never forget the blood feud between the eldest and the fourth god's child. When Lu Jin mentioned Martial God Tianju's sad matter, Martial God Tianju's expression turned gloomy and murderous. He said coldly, Lu Jin, continue to investigate the Luoshui Divine Kingdom and the Heaven Punishers. I need to go out and kill Ji Tianqing personally. Even if I have to go to the ends of the earth, I will find him. Lu Jin naturally had no objections. He hurriedly bowed and said, yes, sir. Martial God Tianju did not want to wait any longer. His figure flashed and left the study, disappearing into the sky. When Ji Tianqing and the other two arrived at the border of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom, it was already 3 days later. The Glaze Fire Dragon carried the three of them and soared high into the sky. This was the territory of the White Frost Empire. The three of them looked down at the mountain range and the land below, their expressions turning solemn. Originally, there were many ancient cities and passes on this land, and there were many villages and towns scattered between the mountains. Under the setting sun, the majestic mountain range and the ancient cities pass reflected each other's beauty, revealing a heavy and peaceful aura. However, at this moment, the mountains and the land were filled with cracks, and deep pits, gullies, and abysses could be seen everywhere. It was a shocking sight. The ancient cities were left with broken fences and dilapidated walls, and the villages and towns were in ruins. The heavens and the earth were dead silent, and there was almost no sign of living people. The destruction of the war had turned the border region into a land of death. It was a desolate and broken scene. Although the three of them had not personally experienced the war half a year ago, they had seen it with their own eyes. It was not difficult for them to imagine how tragic the war had been when they had seen it with their own eyes. The three of them were silent, and their hearts were filled with anger and killing intent. Only by killing the invading Heaven Punishers could they vent their anger. 8 hours later, it was deep into the night. The Glaze Fire Dragon carried the three of them and flew over a majestic ancient city. This place was hundreds of thousands of miles away from the border. Although the ancient city had experienced the war, it had been repaired, leaving only some traces of the war. Most importantly, the ancient city was protected by a holy array, which was like a huge cage. There were hundreds of thousands of people living in the city, and there were 10 martial sage realm warriors guarding the city. There was no doubt that the city was controlled by the Heaven Punishers. Many people had become slaves and were forced to gather cultivation resources under the orders of the Heaven Punishers. Under Ji Tianqing's instructions, the Glaze Fire Dragon stopped. Yunyao immediately guessed his thoughts and asked, Tianqing, do you plan to sneak into the city and kill the 10 Heaven Punishers? Ji Tianqing nodded silently. Ji Ku persuaded him, Brother Tianqing, there are many powerful martial artists in the Heaven Punishers. It is useless to kill the 10 Heaven Punishers. Instead, it will expose our whereabouts and attract a large number of powerful martial artists to attack us. Ji Tianqing said calmly, I understand, but I will not be at ease if I don't kill the Heaven Punishers. Moreover, it is not easy to deal with the Heaven Punishers in one go. We have to accumulate and plan slowly. Even if the Heaven Punishers have thousands of warriors, I will kill them all sooner or later." As he spoke, he quietly landed outside the city. After using a few tricks and spending about 15 minutes, he broke through the protective array and tore a hole in it. Then, the three of them sneaked into the city and started the assassination. Ji Tianqing headed to the city governor's mansion and assassinated the 6 Heaven Punishers in the mansion. Ji Ku and Yunyao headed to the north and south gates respectively and assassinated the 4 Heaven Punishers guarding the city. Everything was carried out in silence. After an hour, the 3 of them completed their mission and left quietly. Then, the 3 of them rode the Glaze Fire Dragon south. Along the way, they sneaked into one city after another and continuously assassinated the Heaven Punishers guarding the city. After the Heaven Punishers had taken over the 4 great empires, this place was considered the hinterland and the situation had stabilized. Thus, there were only a few Heaven Punishers guarding each city. The martial god realm captains and millions of soldiers were at the front line in the south. Chapter 2404. The Heaven Punisher army had occupied half of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom and had rested for 2 months. In the previous battle, the army of 10 million had lost more than 3 million. Only 6 million remained. After 2 months of rest, the Heaven Punisher had gathered another 3 million soldiers. The army had recovered to 10 million. After recuperating, they were even more powerful. General Fu Long kept the Luoshui martial god busy so that he could not assassinate the Heaven Punisher. Thus, Enyu decided to resume his journey and attack the 5 empires in the south. This time, he wanted to completely occupy the Luoshui Divine Kingdom within half a year. But at this time, something major happened in the northernmost part of the continent. At noon, a bloody light shot into the sky from the Blood Sea Abyss in the depths of North Underworld Mountain. An enormous pillar of bloody light seemed to connect the heavens and the earth, shooting straight into the clouds. It was still clearly visible from hundreds of thousands of miles away. Such a worldly phenomenon gave off an earth-shaking demonic aura. Half of North Underworld Mountain was shrouded in bloody clouds. The demons were jubilant. Everyone knew that this was the sign of a demon race expert breaking through to the spirit realm. The leader of the demon race had finally returned to the spirit realm. Roar! Waves of blood surged beneath North Underworld Palace. A demonic roar that could shatter metal and rock and shake the world resounded. A black shadow as large as a mountain rose from the abyss and towered above the sky. It was a giant demon that was 3,000 feet tall and had the head of a bull. Its body was as sturdy as a mountain. It had 3 gigantic heads and 6 scarlet eyes that were as red as fire. On its broad and muscular back were 6 pairs of blade-like wings. Its 4 thick and muscular arms seemed to be able to pierce through the sky and crush the stars. This ferocious giant devil with unparalleled demonic aura was none other than the ancestor fiend god. It had been hiding in the Blood Sea Abyss for many years and had finally recovered to the spirit realm. This time, it had truly broken through to the spirit realm. Its demonic foundation was stable and it had many powerful abilities. When it stood proudly in the sky and roared, its thunderous voice shook the heavens and spread for tens of thousands of miles. This world belongs to this god. The death god has returned and all those who disobey will die. All the demons in Baiming Palace rushed out of the palace and respectfully knelt on the ground, kowtowing and worshipping in excitement. Not only that, but within a radius of 100,000 miles, all the demons who saw this phenomenon prostrated themselves on the ground, worshipping the ancestor demon god. On the square outside Baiming Palace, the great demon Saint Ling Xian was kneeling on the ground, looking extremely excited. His eyes were bright like fire as he looked up at the sky and couldn't help but murmur, "This is great." This day had finally arrived. My clan has endured silently for so long, and we've finally made it. The primogenitor has returned to the godly realm, and the Grim Reaper has returned. The entire world will tremble. Ma Toa, who was kneeling next to him, was so excited that tears rolled down his cheeks. He laughed crazily. Ha 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 ha, the primogenitor has finally returned to the deity realm. The three martial gods are all trash. From today onwards, no matter if it is the three holy kingdoms or the heaven-slaying tribe, they will not be able to humiliate our tribe. As a devil saint, Ba Toa was so agitated that he lost his composure, but no one thought it was inappropriate. After all, everyone was as excited as he was, or even more fanatical than him. The thunderous cheers lasted for a quarter of an hour before dissipating. When the demons gradually calmed down, the primogenitor demon god in the sky slowly descended to Baiming Palace. Whoosh! It retracted its true form, which was over 10,000 meters tall, and turned into a giant in a black robe, which was over 20 feet tall and had 3 heads. Even though its body had shrunk by 1,000 times, its aura and power had not weakened. It was still extremely powerful. It stood tall and straight on the square, its eyes as red as fire as it quietly looked at the demons kneeling on the ground. Ling Xian, Ma Toa, and the others hurriedly bowed and shouted in unison, "Welcome back, primogenitor. Primogenitor has returned to the godly realm, and will rule the world." The primogenitor demon god slowly raised its 4 arms, indicating for everyone to rise. It opened its wide bloody mouth, revealing 2 rows of sharp teeth that flashed with cold light. Its voice was as deep as thunder as it said, "All of my people are this god's descendants. My clan was born noble and unparalleled in the world. We should have ruled the 10,000 worlds and suppressed the 10,000 races. However, after the ancient god war, this god has been silent for 30,000 years. In these 30,000 years, my people have withered and fallen to such a miserable state. Everyone in this world deserves to die. This god will use the power of the 3 calamities and 9 disasters to kill all those who have humiliated my clan. Soon, this god will make the entire world kneel at the feet of my clan." These domineering and authoritative words spread throughout the entire Baiming Palace. The 1,000 demon experts felt their blood boil and their emotions surge as they cheered at the top of their lungs. After a long while, the primogenitor demon god waved his hand, indicating for everyone to leave. It stepped across the square and entered the main hall of Baiming Palace. The great demon Saint Ling Xian and the 3rd demon Saint Ma Toa brought 2 new demon saints into the main hall to await the primogenitor demon god's orders. The primogenitor demon god sat at the head of the table and looked at Ling Xian with an authoritative gaze. He asked in a deep voice, "Ling Xian, what is the current situation of the continent?" Ling Xian took a step forward and bowed respectfully. He said, "Reporting to primogenitor, the heaven-punishing race has taken over half of the Luoshui divine kingdom and caused the entire continent to panic. The heaven-punishing race has rested for 2 months and replenished their numbers to 10 million. I'm afraid that they will soon invade the south and completely take over the Luoshui divine kingdom." The primogenitor demon god nodded slightly and asked, "What is the situation of my people?" Ling Xian reported again, "In the past 3 years, my people have been recuperating and have not been involved in any battles. Now, they have recovered a lot. If primogenitor wants to lead the army into battle, I can quickly gather 8 million warriors to die for you." Ling Xian, Ma Toa, and the 2 new demon saints all thought that the primogenitor demon god had returned to the god realm and would definitely lead the army into battle and start a massacre. Only then could he vent his anger and vent all the humiliation and resentment he had suffered. However, the primogenitor demon god shook his head lightly and said in an authoritative tone, "No, I am not in a hurry to lead the army into battle. Previously, you said that there is a general dragon subduing race above in you and that he is the leader of the heaven-punishing race." "That's right." Ling Xian nodded. The primogenitor demon god revealed a meaningful look and said in a deep voice, "Immediately send a message to General Dragon Subduing Race. Tell him that I want to discuss something important with him face to face." Ling Xian was stunned and said with some astonishment, "Primogenitor, General Dragon Subduing Race has never shown himself in public and his whereabouts are very mysterious. It is said that he is extremely powerful and far surpasses in you and all the other martial gods. He is said to be the strongest person in the divine martial continent. Do you really want to invite him to Baiming Palace to discuss this matter face to face?" The primogenitor demon god glanced at him coldly and said with a cold smile, "The strongest person in the continent? Ha ha ha. No matter how high his realm is, he is only an empty god." Chapter 2405. The ancestor fiend god clearly did not take General Dragon Subduing seriously. Such confident and domineering words shocked Ling Xian, Ba Tuo, and the rest. They all felt deeply proud. Deep in their hearts, they naturally had sufficient confidence. Ling Xian did not say anything else. He hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed. "Yes, ancestor. I will send a message to General Dragon Subduing." With that, he took out his communication jade slip and sent a message to General Dragon Subduing on the spot. The ancestor fiend god pondered for a moment before asking, "Previously, you reported that the Pillar of Heaven's mountains was destroyed by the Heaven Punisher's army?" "Yes." Ling Xian hurriedly nodded. The ancestor fiend god frowned and asked in a low voice, "The Pillar of Heaven's mountains is Kenshin's training ground. There must be Kenshin's inheritance or treasures hidden there. Were there any strange phenomena after the Heaven Punishers destroyed the Pillar of Heaven's mountains? Did they find any treasures?" Ling Xian shook his head and answered truthfully, "No. The Pillar of Heaven's mountains was reduced to ruins like any other mountain. The Heaven Punisher's army built a new Heaven Punishing Palace on the ruins. Since then, the Sword God has disappeared without a trace and hasn't reappeared since." The ancestor fiend god pondered for a moment and said in a cold voice, "Kenshin did not appear in the battle of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. That means he did not participate in the battle. He must still be alive. It's very likely that he's in hiding, recuperating and restoring his strength so that he can take revenge in the future." Ling Xian hesitated for a moment before asking, "Ancestor, Kenshin is now surrounded by enemies. Not only is the Heaven Punishers looking for him, but even the Heaven's End God Nation is looking for him. Don't you think we should make the first move and seize his bloodline and inheritance?" The ancestor fiend god waved his hand and sneered mockingly. "No need. I have already returned to the God realm and no longer need Kenshin's blood to condense my divine body. Moreover, the Heaven Punishers are too ambitious and will definitely become a stumbling block for my race. We cannot let the Heaven Punishers succeed. Leaving Kenshin to deal with them will weaken their strength." Ling Xian was enlightened and showed a sincere expression of admiration. He nodded and said, "I see." The primogenitor was indeed far-sighted. The Heaven Punishers were in a hurry to expand and were determined to kill Luo Shui and Kenshin. "We'll wait until both sides are injured, and then we'll reap the benefits." The ancestor devil god smiled and nodded, saying in a low voice, "It's good that you understand. No matter how strong the Heaven Punisher race was, it was only temporary. In the end, we will be the ones to rule this world." Ling Xian, Ta Tuo, and the others all agreed. They were full of hope for the future. Not long after, a dark red blood light flew from the horizon and landed in front of Ling Xian. That was a mysterious blood jade. It was the message sent by the dragon subduing general. After Ling Xian read the message with his divine sense, a smile appeared on his face. "Ancestor, General Fu Long said that he had long wanted to meet you. Since you've invited him, of course he'll have to accept." Ling Xian bowed towards the ancestral fiend celestial and conveyed the message truthfully. Very quickly, 2 days passed. On the morning of the third day, Baiming Palace was decorated in a grand and solemn manner. There were even ceremonial guards in the square outside the palace. At 9 in the morning, Ling Xian, Ta Tuo, and the others walked out of the palace and waited in the square to welcome General Fu Long. Not long after, a black shadow came from the south and traveled 100 miles in an instant. Swoosh! The black shadow stopped in the sky above Baiming Palace and revealed its true appearance. It was a battleship that was 10,000 feet long. The battleship hung high in the sky. After the door opened, a huge monster walked out. This was a half-human, half-beast monster. Its body was covered in black dragon scales, and 2 ferocious black dragons poked out of its shoulders. It was surrounded by a mysterious black aura. Without a doubt, this was the leader of the Heaven Punisher race, General Fu Long. Behind him were 4 black-armored guards from the Heaven Punishing clan. General Fu Long led the 4 guards and descended from the sky, landing in the square outside the palace. Ling Xian, Ta Tuo, and the others immediately went forward and bowed with a smile. "Welcome, General Fu Long. Our ancestor has been waiting for a long time." Ling Xian, Ta Tuo, and the others were full of confidence. Their attitude towards General Fu Long was considered polite, but they were not respectful or humble enough. General Fu Long sensed that something was amiss. He only nodded slightly and did not say anything. After that, Ling Xian, Ta Tuo, and the others escorted General Fu Long out of the square and into the conference hall. The ancestor Fiend Celestial was sitting on the main seat in the cold and gloomy conference hall. At that moment, he was only a black-robed giant that was 20 feet tall and had 3 huge heads. In terms of appearance and size, he was obviously not as domineering as General Fu Long. However, the ancestor Fiend Celestial's aura was more mysterious and gloomy. His aura was no weaker than General Fu Long's. General Fu Long came to the center of the hall and sized up the ancestor Fiend Celestial. The purple fire in his eyes flickered continuously. The ancestor Fiend Celestial also looked at him and sized him up from head to toe. The 2 of them looked at each other for a moment before retracting their gazes. The ancestor Fiend Celestial raised his hand and said in a low voice, "Welcome, General Fu Long, to Baiming Palace. Please take a seat." General Fu Long grinned and said with a faint smile, "There is no need to sit. Lord Fiend Celestial, please get to the point." With his size, the seats in the hall were clearly too small, so he simply stood and spoke. The ancestor Fiend Celestial did not force him and said with a playful expression, "Looks like General Fu Long has put in a lot of effort. You have actually grasped my race's language." General Fu Long maintained his fake smile and said calmly, "If not, how would I be able to communicate with Lord Fiend Celestial?" He. The ancestor Fiend Celestial sneered, and his gaze became even sharper. "I'm afraid that it's not just my race's language, but also the human language and the situation in the Shenwu continent. General Fu Long has grasped them all." General Fu Long raised his eyebrows and said indifferently, "Since I have come to this world, I have to learn and adapt. In the human language that I recently learned, this is called, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. When in Rome, do as the Romans do." The ancestor Fiend Celestial sneered again. "I'm afraid you have other motives." The purple fire in General Fu Long's eyes flickered as he looked at the ancestor Fiend Celestial. "I don't understand. Lord Fiend Celestial, please speak your mind." "All right." The ancestor Fiend Celestial did not beat around the bush and retracted his sneer. With a solemn expression, he said, "The Heaven Punisher first occupied the 5 southern regions of my race, then took over the 72 cities and Tianzhu Mountain. Now, they have even taken over half of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. The Heaven Punisher has swallowed mountains and rivers and pointed their swords at the entire continent. Have they thought of the consequences?" General Fu Long said expressionlessly, "War and slaughter are nothing more than the winners taking all. What consequences can there be?" Moreover, with my race's strength and influence, it is easy for us to sweep through the entire continent. The ancestor fiend celestial sneered again and said with a playful tone, "He he he. General Fu Long is really confident." Chapter 2406. The ancestor fiend celestial's words caused General Dragon Subduing to frown. "What do you mean?" Although General Dragon Subduing was very confident in the strength of the Heaven Punisher tribe, he did not refute the ancestor fiend celestial. Because he knew that if the current situation continued, the number of soldiers and captains of the Heaven Punisher tribe would definitely decrease. Because of this, he proposed the plan of using the weak to defeat the weak. The ancestor fiend celestial looked at General Dragon Subduing and said solemnly, "Instead of a Pyrrhic victory, why not cooperate and win together?" Before General Dragon Subduing came, he had already guessed the ancestor fiend celestial's motive. Hearing this, he did not find it strange at all. He asked calmly, "How do we cooperate?" The ancestor fiend celestial smiled and said, "Very simple. You and I will cooperate and divide the world equally." General Dragon Subduing sneered in his heart, but his expression did not change. He said, "I have also thought of this suggestion. We can discuss it." Seeing that General Dragon Subduing did not reject, the ancestor fiend celestial was reassured. He nodded and said, "It seems that we are in agreement. Since this is the case, let's cut the crap and discuss the cooperation directly. First, we must cooperate fairly and show our sincerity." General Dragon Subduing nodded in agreement and added, "Besides sincerity, we must trust each other." The ancestor fiend celestial grinned and said in a low voice, "That's right. Then General Dragon Subduing, please return the 5 southern regions to my tribe. After all, that is the territory of the North Underworld Mountain and there are many demon race citizens there." General Dragon Subduing raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, "The 5 southern regions are originally Lord Fiend Celestial's territory. I do not want to keep occupying it. Since it is a cooperation, I can return the 5 southern regions. But I have shown my sincerity, and I hope Lord Fiend Celestial can show his sincerity." "What sincerity?" The ancestor Fiend Celestial looked at him with bright eyes. General Dragon Subduing raised his right hand and extended 3 fingers. "In order to attack the Luoshui Divine Kingdom, my tribe has lost many soldiers and suffered heavy casualties. Lord Fiend Celestial, please send 3 million demon warriors to help me." Hearing this request, the ancestor Fiend Celestial, Ling Xian, and Ba Tuo all frowned. Especially Ling Xian, Ba Tuo, and the 2 new devil sages. Their expressions changed on the spot, and they almost cursed out loud. The current Dark North Mountain could only recruit 8 million warriors even if they tried their best. The moment the Dragon Subduing general opened his mouth, he asked for 3 million warriors. This was definitely an exorbitant demand, seizing the chance to blackmail. However, with the ancestral archdevil god present, Ling Xian, Ba Tuo, and the rest did not dare to interrupt. They could only suppress their anger. The ancestor Fiend Celestial pondered for a moment before saying in a solemn tone, "General Fu Long, isn't it too laughable that you want this god to use 3 million warriors to exchange for the 5 regions in the south? If you really need 3 million warriors, this god can give it to you. However, this is a fair cooperation, and the territories we occupy will be equally divided. As for the 4 northern nations of the Luoshui God Nation, you have to leave them to my clan to guard. The 5 empires in the south will belong to the Heaven Punisher race." The Dragon Subduing general's pupils instantly contracted and the purple flames in his eyes flickered several times. Anger surged in his heart, and he almost lost his temper. After trying his best to suppress his anger, he sneered and said, "Lord God Fiend, you must be joking. The 4 empires in the north of the Luoshui God Nation were conquered by my clan after spending half a year and sacrificing over 3 million soldiers. Even if I am willing to hand them over to you, the Heaven Punisher race's soldiers will definitely not agree. The ancestor fiend celestial pretended to think for a moment before saying, since this is the case, this god will not force you. We will not give up the 4 northern nations. The Heaven Punisher race's army will stop attacking and leave the 5 southern empires to my clan. We will divide the Luo Shui god nation equally. If you still want to fight, you can lead the army to attack the vast god nation. Before he could finish speaking, the dragon subduing general interrupted him with a solemn expression. Lord God Fiend, since this god is leading the army to attack the Luo Shui god nation, this god nation will definitely be taken over. As for the vast god nation, if Lord God Fiend is interested, you can lead the army to attack. This god will not interfere. At that time, this god nation will be occupied by the Luo Shui god nation, and Lord God Fiend will occupy the vast god nation. When only the Heaven Punisher god nation is left, we will join forces to attack and divide the territory of the Heaven Punisher god nation equally. Isn't this the best of both worlds? The ancestor Fiend Celestial's expression darkened as he said in a low voice, "This is fair, but this god cannot lend you those 3 million soldiers. Otherwise, how will my clan have the manpower to attack the vast god nation?" The dragon subduing general nodded and said regretfully, "Lord Godfiend's words make sense. If this is the case, then this god cannot return the 5 southern regions. Otherwise, my clan's resources and manpower will not be enough." At this point, this negotiation was considered to have collapsed. The ancestor Fiend Celestial's aura became even more gloomy as he said with a cold expression, "In that case, the dragon subduing general is not willing to cooperate with this god." The dragon subduing general spread out his hands and sneered. "It is not that this god is unwilling, but Lord Godfiend has no sincerity. This god is also in a difficult position." Before he could finish speaking, a blood-red light sped over from the sky outside the main hall. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, that blood-red light flew into the main hall and landed beside the dragon subduing general. After the blood-red light dissipated, a piece of communication blood jade appeared. A black-armored guard picked up the blood jade. After reading the message inside, he reported to the dragon subduing general, reporting to General, Deputy General, and has sent an urgent message. A few mysterious experts have infiltrated the Luo Shui god nation and are assassinating our soldiers. As of now, 2 captains and over 200 soldiers have been killed. Deputy General and guesses that those mysterious experts are most likely Ji Tianqing. Suddenly hearing this news, the dragon subduing general's heart burned with anger as his eyes flashed with killing intent. He hurriedly suppressed his anger and turned to the ancestor Fiend Celestial. "Lord God Fiend, today's negotiation shall end here. This god shall take his leave." Seeing that he was about to turn and leave, the ancestor Fiend Celestial revealed a meaningful smile as he slowly raised his hand and said, "General Dragon Subduing, please wait. Looks like you're in trouble. Let this god guess, it is most likely related to the Luo Shui martial god or Ji Tianqing." The dragon subduing general did not reply, which meant that he had silently agreed. The ancestor Fiend Celestial smiled playfully and said, "Looks like this god guessed correctly. That's right, those 2 fellows are very difficult to deal with and will definitely become a huge problem for you. Why don't we take this opportunity to make a deal?" "What deal?" The dragon subduing general frowned as he looked at him. The ancestor Fiend Celestial said confidently, "This god will help you kill Ji Tianqing, and you will return the 5 regions of the south." The dragon subduing general said indifferently, "He is just a martial saint. This god can kill him with a snap of my fingers. His life is not worth this god giving up the 5 regions of the south." He. The ancestor Fiend Celestial sneered. "If that is the case, how can he live until now? To tell you the truth, he is Kenshin from 1,000 years ago, the god king who controlled all the gods." Chapter 2407. As for Ji Tianqing's identity, General Dragon Subduing had sent men to investigate. As such, he knew that the ancestor demon god was not exaggerating. After pondering for a while, General Dragon Subduing asked, "Lord Demon God, how confident are you?" The ancestor Fiend Celestial sneered and said with certainty, 100%. General Dragon Subduing's body shook as he looked at the ancestor demon god. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. The ancestor demon god's aura is unfathomable and his strength can threaten me. I cannot underestimate him. Rumor has it that he is the ancient great demon god and has killed numerous deities. He is known as the terrifying death god. If these rumors are true, then it should be easy for him to deal with Ji Tianqing, who is a martial sage. General Dragon Subduing nodded and agreed to the deal. Good. I agree to this deal. Take it as our first cooperation. The ancestor demon god smiled confidently and said in a low voice, "General, please wait for my good news and prepare to return the 5 regions of the south. Goodbye." General Dragon Subduing cupped his hands and walked out of the hall. Take care. The ancestor demon god sat on the throne and looked at General Dragon Subduing's back view as he sneered. After a while, General Dragon Subduing boarded the battleship and left quickly. The ancestor demon god stood up and waved his hand, indicating for Ling Xian, Ming Tua and the rest to leave. Ling Xian hesitated for a while and asked with a frown, "Ancestor, Tianju martial god is currently looking for Ji Tianqing. With his help, he will be able to kill Ji Tianqing. Do you still want to make a trip down personally?" "Of course." The ancestor demon god nodded without hesitation and said, "Tianju has already attacked twice but failed to kill Ji Tianqing. This proves that he is incompetent. Only when this deity personally makes a move can Ji Tianqing be completely eliminated. It has been almost 10 years since the battle back then. This time, I will make him disappear forever." A voice that was as oppressive as thunder reverberated in the hall, and it contained a soul-stirring killing intent. In the Luoshui Holy Kingdom, the 7 million troops of the Heaven Punishing Tribe had already led their troops south to attack the 5 nations in the south. The remaining 300,000 divine guards were roaming the front lines, trying their best to stop the invasion of the Heaven Punisher army. The Luoshui martial god, who had been chased for a long time and hadn't shown himself for 2 months, started his assassination plan again. At the same time, Ji Tianqing and the other 2 were also within the borders of the Crimson Sun Empire. They were constantly assassinating the soldiers and captains of the Heaven Punishers. In the past half a month, 3 captains at the martial god realm and more than 400 warriors from the Heaven Punishing clan had died at their swords. After the news spread, it caused quite a commotion in the 4 empires. Originally, the Heaven Punishing race's army had already firmly controlled the territories of the 4 kingdoms. They treated this place as their rear and only left behind a few soldiers to guard it. Now that there were frequent assassinations, the soldiers of the Heaven Punishing clan were all anxious and worried. However, they couldn't give up their territory. They could only hide and pray that General Dragon Subduing would deal with Ji Tianqing soon. Late that night, the wind was biting cold and snow was swirling in the air. The Glaze Fire Dragon carried Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku as it flew over the star-moon wasteland of the Crimson Sun Empire. Their target was the Crimson Sun City at the end of the star-moon wasteland. That was the imperial capital of the Crimson Sun Empire, which had long been occupied by the Heaven Punishers. There were 300,000 soldiers, 30 black-armored warriors, and 1 captain stationed there. In the past half a month, we have been active in the Baishuang and Changlong Empire. After assassinating 2 captains and hundreds of warriors from the Heaven Punishers, our whereabouts must have been exposed. Now, you and General Dragon Subduing must be looking for us. Ji Tianqing stood on the dragon's back and looked at the night sky in front of him as he spoke with a calm expression. Ji Ku continued, "Therefore, we have to catch them off guard and directly rush to the imperial capital of the Crimson Sun Empire. There are hundreds of warriors from the Heaven Punishers in the Crimson Sun Empire, but there are only 2 captains. As long as we kill one of them, the pressure on the Crimson Sun Empire will be greatly reduced. Yunyao shook her head gently and said in a low voice, not only will it reduce the pressure on the Crimson Sun Empire, but it will also reduce the pressure on the 5 countries in the south. The Heaven Punishers are attacking the 5 countries in the south, and we cannot fight them head-on. We can only create chaos in the 4 countries in the north. Hopefully, we can restrain the Heaven Punishers so that they cannot attack recklessly. Only by stalling for time will we have the hope of turning the tables. Ji Tianqing nodded and comforted them. We have not broken through to the immortal state yet, so we cannot fight the Heaven Punishers head-on. But don't worry, I believe that day will come soon. Previously, when we fought with the martial god captains, we benefited a lot, and our strength is slowly increasing. I have a feeling that if we go through a few more battles of life and death, we might be able to break through the shackles. Yunyao and Ji Ko looked expectant as they nodded to show that they understood. An hour later, the Glaze Fire Dragon arrived at the end of the Star Moon Wasteland and stopped in the night sky. A few hundred miles in front of them, there was a majestic and solemn ancient city that stood quietly in the night sky. It was late at night, but only a few lights were lit in the vast and majestic ancient city. It was cold and quiet. Yunyao put away the Glaze Fire Dragon, and the 3 of them stood side by side in the night sky. Ji Tianqing looked at the ancient city and said in a low voice, "That is the Crimson Sun Imperial Capital. Act according to the plan and be careful." After saying that, he led Yunyao and Ji Ko toward the Imperial Capital. The Imperial Capital was enveloped by a divine formation, but Ji Tianqing only used an hour to break it. After tearing a hole in the formation, the 3 of them passed through the hole and quietly entered the city. Ji Tianqing went to the Imperial Palace alone, while Yunyao and Ji Ko split up to assassinate the Heaven Punishers in the city. A silent massacre unfolded under the night sky. The Arch Palace was heavily guarded, with a large number of soldiers standing guard. There were also a dozen or so heaven-punishing race warriors and a captain. After Ji Tianqing sneaked into the Imperial Palace, he quickly killed 12 Heaven Punishers. There were only 2 Heaven Punishers left, but they were with the captain. The 3 of them were discussing military matters in the Imperial study, which was heavily guarded outside. Ji Tianqing remained invisible and easily hid from the guards and sentries, sneaking into the study. Swish! With a flash of golden light, the god-killing flying knife left his hand and drew an arc in the air. Bang, bang! With 2 muffled sounds, the god-killing flying knife pierced through the chests of the 2 Heaven Punishers and they fell to the ground, dead. Dark red blood splattered on the captain's silver armor, which looked extremely shocking under the light. The silver-armored captain, who was sitting in front of the table, immediately turned pale and stood up. He was shocked and angry. Without hesitation, he took out his bronze sword and slashed at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing didn't dodge. He held the sword of burial of heaven in his hand and went forward bravely. Swish, swish, swish. He held the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand and instantly shot out 7 beams of starlight like the Big Dipper. Chapter 2408. Bang! 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 The blood-red blade light collided with the starry sword light, causing a series of muffled sounds to ring out. Light scattered in all directions, and a violent gale wreaked havoc, sweeping through the entire palace. All of a sudden, the surrounding palaces and buildings collapsed and turned into ruins. The silver-armored captain, who was a LV3 martial god realm expert, was sent flying by the sword light and crashed into the ruins. Even though he was only slightly injured, his body was covered in dust and he looked rather disheveled. He roared angrily and leaped up from the ruins, glaring at Ji Tianqing with eyes as red as fire. Despicable human, you must be that bastard Ji Tianqing. The captain glared at Ji Tianqing as he shouted in a thunderous voice. It was obvious that he had already received news that Ji Tianqing was going around assassinating the Heaven Punisher soldiers. Ji Tianqing looked at him coldly and said mockingly, "I didn't expect that all of you would have learned the human language. How ambitious." In the past half a month, the captains that Lu Yin had killed had all learned the human language. From this, it could be seen that the Heaven Punisher had a grand plan. They wanted to take over the entire Five Elements realm and enslave 10 billion humans. "So what if I am?" The captain sneered and said with a proud expression, "You think you can destroy my clan's plan to rule the Shenwu continent? You're like a mantis trying to stop a chariot." As he spoke, he gripped his bronze warblade with both hands and charged at Ji Tianqing without any regard for his own safety. He slashed out dozens of blood-red blade lights. The dark sky was immediately illuminated by the blood-red light, which was dazzling and eye-catching. Ji Tianqing stood in the midst of the blood-red light, but he was fearless. Golden light surged out of his body, and his body instantly swelled to 30 meters tall, turning into a golden-armored giant. His battle prowess also soared by 6 times, surpassing the martial sage realm, and his aura was even more powerful than the captain's. Heavenly Dragon Slash. He roared and gripped the sword of burial of heaven with both hands, brazenly slashing out a 3,000-meter-long golden dragon shadow. Boom! Amidst an earth-shattering boom, the golden dragon silhouette smashed through a dozen or so streaks of crimson light and struck the silver-armored captain. Pooh! The silver-armored captain's expression changed drastically. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. Then, he was sent flying backward. A crack appeared on the armor around his waist, revealing his flesh and bones. The divine artifact silver armor could not withstand the sharpness of the sword of burial of heaven. Just a little bit more and he would have been cut in half. Plop, the captain was sent flying backward for tens of miles, smashing into a collapsed palace. Heavily injured, blood kept flowing out of his mouth and nose, and he let out a painful groan. However, before he could get up, Ji Tianqing chased after him again. 10,000 swords become one. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands, raised it high, and slashed down fiercely. In an instant, nearly 10,000 sword shadows appeared in the sky. Swish! Swish! Dense starry sword light poured down from the sky like raindrops and gathered on the sword of burial of heaven. In the end, it turned into a giant starry sword that was thousands of feet long. This sword was formed by the condensation of tens of thousands of starry sword shadows. It gathered the endless power of the stars and contained terrifying power. The silver-armored captain's face was full of horror, and his eyes were full of despair. His fighting spirit and will to fight immediately crumbled and fell apart. There was only one thought in his mind, and that was to escape. However, half of the imperial capital was shrouded by Ji Tianqing's sword will of heaven. The area within 100 miles was sealed by an invisible pressure. The silver-armored captain wanted to teleport away, but he was like a frozen fly, unable to move. At the critical moment of life and death, he could only hold the bronze battle saber high above his head with both hands and block with all his strength. Boom! In the next moment, the giant starry sword slashed down with an earth-shattering boom. The blood-red saber light collapsed, and the bronze battle saber was broken into 4 pieces on the spot. The silver-armored captain's burly body was also split into 2 from head to toe by the giant sword. The 2 halves of his body could not withstand the destructive power of the sword light and exploded into powder on the spot. The silver-armored captain was dead. He was killed by Ji Tianqing with 1 strike. Ji Tianqing was only half a step away from the divine realm, but he only used 3 moves to kill a LV3 martial god realm expert. Such powerful combat strength shattered the consensus of the martial arts world. No one had expected such an unimaginable outcome. The giant starry sword that was thousands of feet long was weakened after killing the silver-armored captain. Bang! The giant sword hit the ground with a deafening boom. Suddenly, a 100-mile-long ravine appeared on the ground, dividing the imperial capital into two halves. The ravine was bottomless and as dark as ink. It was like a terrifying abyss. The area within a 1,000-mile radius shook, and countless cracks appeared on the ground. The imperial capital was in complete chaos. Countless houses and buildings collapsed into ruins, raising smoke and dust that covered the sky and the sun. Hundreds of thousands of people screamed in horror and ran away in panic. After a long time, when the smoke and dust in the sky and the deafening boom dissipated, the imperial capital had been reduced to ruins. The power of one strike could destroy a majestic city. The Tao of Kenshin was so terrifying. Ji Tianqing slowly put away the burial of heaven's sword and glanced at the abyss under his feet. He said expressionlessly, "It's a pity that there was only one captain. The battle ended as soon as I used my full strength. If there were more captains, the battle would have lasted longer and the situation would have been more dangerous. Then, I would have been able to stimulate my potential. In this way, there would be hope for me to break through the shackles." He muttered a few words to himself, his tone somewhat regretful. At this moment, Yun Yao and Ji Ku also completed their tasks and came to his side. Swoosh! The two girls landed beside him and glanced at the abyss and ruins. They asked in unison, "Tianqing, brother, has it been settled?" Ji Tianqing nodded and said calmly, "The news will spread very quickly. I reckon that General Dragon Fu and you will come here tomorrow morning. We have to go." After saying that, he flew out of the city with Yun Yao and Ji Ku. After succeeding in one strike, they had to quickly escape. This was the only way to avoid being caught by General Dragon Fu. The three of them flew out of the imperial capital and cut through the night sky at lightning speed, flying towards the south. However, they had only flown a few hundred miles when a bright golden light lit up the night sky in front of them. Crack! The night sky that was thousands of feet above the ground was torn apart by that golden light, revealing a huge gap. Swoosh! A tall and burly figure in a golden robe stepped out of the gap and stood proudly high in the sky. It was a middle-aged man wearing a golden dragon robe and a luxurious crown. He blocked Ji Tianqing's path and sized up everyone with a cold gaze. Ji Tianqing was no stranger to him. After taking a closer look at his appearance, he instantly frowned. Martial God Tianju. Yun Yao and Ji Ku's expressions also changed. They muttered in confusion, "Damn it, why is he here?" Chapter 2409. Without a doubt. The person who appeared was Martial God Tianju. He stood proudly in the night sky with his hands behind his back, looking down at Ji Tianqing and the other two. He. Ji Tianqing. I've been looking for you for a month and I've finally found you. Martial God Tianju smirked and said mockingly, "This time, you don't have that bitch Luo Shui to protect you. I'd like to see how you're going to escape from me." In fact, this was the third time he had tried to kill Ji Tianqing. If he failed again, it would be a great humiliation. However, Martial God Tianju believed that without Martial God Luo Shui's protection, Ji Tianqing would definitely die. Therefore, he was confident and had a card up his sleeve. Ji Tianqing looked at him expressionlessly as a playful smile appeared on his face. Escape? Why should I escape? Martial God Tianju was stunned for a moment before he burst out laughing. Ha ha ha. It seems like you know your place and you know that you can't escape from me. If that's the case, there's no need to waste my breath. Take your own life. After all, you were once the strongest person in the continent, the deity king who controlled all the deities. I'll give you a dignified death and let you keep your corpse intact. Upon hearing this, Yun Yao and Ji Ku's faces turned cold. They held their swords and stared at Martial God Tianju with murderous intent. Ji Tianqing's smirk deepened as he looked at Martial God Tianju with disdain and said, "Tianju, you're really confident and arrogant. However, you'll soon find out that you're the one who's going to escape. As he spoke, he slowly raised the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand and pointed it at martial god Tianju. An overbearing aura burst out from his body. Martial god Tianju laughed disdainfully and said, "Ha ha ha. Kenshin, oh Kenshin, I didn't expect you to be an exception. With two beauties by your side, you dare to spout such nonsense for the sake of face and dignity. What a joke. Since you don't know what's good for you, then this god will personally send you on your way." Then, martial god Tianju waved his sleeves and shot out gold and silver light pillars from his palms. They poured down like a flood. All of a sudden, everything within 1,000 miles was illuminated by golden and silver starlight. The gold and silver light pillars released a destructive pressure that enveloped Ji Tianqing and the other two. Yun Yao and Ji Ke acted as if they were facing a formidable enemy. They quickly unleashed their trump cards and launched a counterattack. Milky Way Ribbon. Yun Yao waved her shadowless dual swords and slashed out a huge crescent-shaped sword light towards the golden light pillar. Sacred fire soaring the heavens. Ji Ke also let out a roar and slashed out two huge flaming swords. The two of them knew how terrifying martial god Tianju's power was. They used all of their power without holding anything back. However, their power was far from martial god Tianju's. Pang pang pang. Amidst the deafening noise, the Milky Way ribbon and the huge flaming sword struck the gold and silver light pillars and collapsed on the spot. Billions of silver and golden red fragments scattered in the night sky. It was extremely dazzling. The power of the gold and silver light pillars did not diminish. They were like two divine dragons that blasted towards Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing did not dare to be careless. He immediately unleashed the celestial dragon tyrant body and turned into a 30-meter tall golden armored giant. The surface of his body was covered with dense golden dragon scales. His shoulders and knees even protruded with sharp dragon spikes. This was the perfect form of the celestial dragon tyrant body. Ji Tianqing had obviously pushed his power to the extreme. 10,000 swords returned to one. He shouted angrily. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed at the gold and silver light pillars. Suddenly, the sky lit up with tens of thousands of cold lights and dense starlight sword light descended. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of sword light gathered on the sword of burial of heaven and formed a huge starlight sword that was 1,000 feet long. Kaboom! The huge starlight sword struck the gold and silver light pillars. An earth-shattering noise erupted and spread for thousands of miles. The thunderous sound waves made the earth within a radius of thousands of miles tremble. Within hundreds of miles, several mountain peaks cracked and collapsed with countless gravel. The huge starlight sword and the gold and silver light pillars collapsed at the same time. Billions of light fragments rained down like a torrential rain, covering the sky and the sun. The violent and devastating shock waves swept across thousands of miles. Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ke were all sent flying by the shock waves. Blood flowed out of their mouths and noses. A huge crater of 200 miles was blasted out of the ground. The nearby mountains were also razed to the ground. Such power was enough to destroy the world. Plop! 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 Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ke were sent flying dozens of miles away. They smashed into the ruins one after another, splashing a large cloud of dust. The two sides had only exchanged one blow and the three of them were already injured. Ji Tianqing raised his sleeve to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. His figure flashed and charged into the sky, facing martial god Tianju even more valiantly. God-slaying sword. He swung the burial of heaven sword with all his might and slashed out a dazzling golden giant sword toward martial god Tianju. Yun Yao also flew into the sky. She held the shadowless sword tightly with both hands and stabbed out with all her might, aiming for martial god Tianju's vital points. Ji Ku stood in the night sky. He waved his hand and formed a mysterious seal. A mountain-sized fire bird phantom appeared in the night sky. Burning wrath of heaven. She shouted and slowly pushed her hands forward. Immediately, the majestic fire bird phantom pounced at martial god Tianju from the sky with a divine flame that could burn the world. The three of them spread out and surrounded martial god Tianju, attacking him with all their might. Martial god Tianju was fighting 1 against 3, but he was not afraid at all. Instead, his fighting spirit was high. The divine power in his body surged, causing his golden robe and long hair to flutter in the wind. He looked extremely domineering and confident. Even if you were once a divine king who dominated the galaxy, you are now just a puny martial saint. What can you do if I kill you tonight? Are you angry? Are you desperate? That's right. I will trample you under my feet and step on your corpse to reach the peak of martial arts. As he spoke, martial god Tianju formed a seal with both hands and formed a mysterious seal. Swish. 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 Gold and silver divine power surged out of his palms and formed a huge vortex in the night sky in front of him. This was the shifting stars technique. Boom. 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 The god-slaying sword, more than 30 shadowless swords, and the mountain-sized fire bird phantom were all blocked by the gold and silver vortex. A loud explosion shook the heavens. The sword lights shattered and the fire bird phantom collapsed. The gold and silver vortex trembled and changed shape but did not shatter. In the blink of an eye, the colorful light fragments were swallowed up by the vortex. Ji Tianqing and the other two's attacks were all neutralized by martial god Tianju. He laughed confidently and said, "Ha ha ha ha. Is this all you have? You are so weak. Let me show you my stellar transposition technique." As he spoke, he formed a seal to activate the gold and silver vortex. It released 3 golden-red pillars of fire toward Ji Tianqing and the other two. Chapter 24:10. 7 months ago, Ji Tianqing had seen martial god Tianju's star shift technique. Now, martial god Tianju's power had become more profound, and his secret technique had become more exquisite. Seeing the 3 fire pillars coming down, the 3 of them looked serious, and their eyes were filled with fear. Such a destructive attack could only be dodged and neutralized. They could not take it head-on. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing used the Armillary Heaven secret technique without hesitation and merged with heaven and earth within 2,000 miles. His figure flashed, and he disappeared from sight. Yunyao was protected by the divine armor, so her life was not in danger. She waved the shadowless dual swords to block. As for Ji Ku, she hurriedly took out the heavenly star chain. She used the power of the heavenly star chain to form a starlight shield to protect herself. Bam! 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 In the next moment, 3 fire pillars came down with earth-shattering sounds. 2 fire pillars hit Yunyao and Ji Ku, while the other fire pillar hit the ground. Yunyao was blasted away. Her entire body was wrapped in flames as she smashed into the ground. Fortunately, the divine armor blocked the power of the fire pillars. She was only lightly injured. Ji Ku's starlight shield was shattered. She was sent flying and landed 30 miles away. However, the heavenly star chain blocked the power of the fire pillars. She was not injured. As for Ji Tianqing, a deep pit of a few hundred miles was blasted out of the ground. The ground was filled with cracks. Dozens of mountain peaks had collapsed, and large tracts of forests and mountain ranges had been reduced to ruins. Ji Tianqing had merged with the heaven and earth. Now that the heaven and earth had been destroyed to such an extent, he was naturally injured. However, he endured his injuries and took advantage of martial god Tianju's laughter to silently appear behind him. He used all his strength to activate the god-slaying flying knife and hit martial god Tianju. He aimed at the back of martial god Tianju's head. Swish! The golden light flashed and disappeared in the night sky. Martial god Tianju sensed the danger and the murderous intent. His laughter stopped abruptly. He didn't have time to turn around. He instantly lowered his head and bent his waist, forming a golden divine power shield. But what he did not expect was that the god-slaying flying dagger was controlled by Ji Tianqing's consciousness and actually changed direction midway. Boom! With a muffled explosion, the god-slaying flying dagger pierced through martial god Tianju's protective divine power and stabbed into his back. No matter how tough his divine body was, he couldn't block the god-slaying flying dagger's attack. Pooh! The god-slaying flying knife instantly pierced through his divine body and flew out from his abdomen, leaving behind a bloody hole the size of a fist. Golden divine blood immediately spurted out and scattered across the night sky. Incomparable pain entered martial god Tianju's mind, causing his body to stiffen. He could not help but cry out in agony. Ah! He immediately bent down and reached out to cover the bloody hole in his abdomen. His face twisted as he cursed. Ji Tianqing! You despicable beast! You're a Kenshin! How dare you use hidden weapons? How despicable! His voice was as deep as thunder and his tone was filled with hatred. He was so angry that he almost went berserk. 20 miles away, Ji Tianqing stood in the night sky covered in blood. He looked at martial god Tianju coldly and said with a cold smile, I'm Ji Tianqing, not a Kenshin. So, to kill you, I'll do anything. Martial god Tianju became even more furious. He pointed at him and roared hysterically, You shameless bastard! I'll tear you into pieces. Hee hee. Ji Tianqing sneered disdainfully, not to mention tonight, even if it's your next life, you won't have the chance. Then, he held the burial of heaven's sword and attacked martial god Tianju again. Yun Yao and Ji Ku also made a comeback. They swung their swords and performed their secret techniques. The three of them surrounded martial god Tianju and attacked him with all their might. Martial god Tianju was severely injured and his aura weakened. He did not dare to underestimate his opponent and could only defend himself. The two of them fought fiercely in the sky. Their figures flickered continuously. Unknowingly, the two of them had exchanged dozens of blows and the battlefield had shifted to the south. Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku were sent flying again by martial god Tianju. Their injuries worsened. However, Ji Tianqing also took the chance to attack with the god-slaying spear and stabbed martial god Tianju's left leg. With a muffled sound, the god-slaying spear pierced through his thigh and golden blood spurted out. Martial god Tianju was sent flying for dozens of miles. His body was bent and he roared in anger. His body was covered in blood. He swung his sword crazily and performed his secret techniques. Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku were forced to retreat. Boom boom boom. The loud noise spread out and reached thousands of miles away. The dazzling radiance of Dharma power and divine power could be seen clearly from hundreds of thousands of miles away. The two of them fought desperately and wanted to kill each other. However, the four of them had exchanged more than 300 blows and there was still no winner. Both of them were injured. Of course, martial god Tianju was still slightly better. In the battle, he held the initiative and had the upper hand. Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku did not dare to fight him head-on. After the two of them exchanged 400 blows, martial god Tianju was stabbed by the god-slaying flying dagger again. There was a bloody hole in his right shoulder. However, these injuries were more humiliating than painful for him. They did not affect him from continuing to fight. Yin Yao and Ji Ku had divine weapons to protect them. Their injuries were not too serious. However, they had used up too much of their Dharma power. They could not continue and it was difficult to hurt martial god Tianju. Ji Tianqing's injuries were the most serious. Not only did he have dozens of wounds on his body, but his internal organs were also shattered. Golden divine blood soaked his white robe. His hair was disheveled and he was sweating profusely. His face was also covered in blood. He had also used up more than half of his Dharma power. His aura had become violent and chaotic. If he continued to exchange a few hundred blows, even if he did not die, his body would be destroyed by martial god Tianju. However, he did not have any intention of retreating. Instead, he became more and more courageous. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that there was a hint of passion and anticipation in his eyes. That was because in this battle where there was a great disparity in strength, he had used all his strength and constantly stimulated his potential. He had narrowly escaped death again and again. This caused his mind and Dharma power to be tense and pushed to the limit. He could clearly sense that the shackles of the martial god realm were loosening. The hope of breaking through to the divine realm was getting greater and greater. As expected, only a battle of life and death, the tempering of brushing shoulders with the god of death can stimulate unlimited potential. If I endure a few hundred more blows, I might be able to break through the shackles and reach the martial god realm on the spot. At that time, I can turn defeat into victory and kill Tianju. Ji Tianqing pursed his dry lips. These thoughts flashed through his mind. His eyes became even more determined. Sword of Burial of Heaven. He shouted in a low voice. He held the Sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands. He activated his Dharma power without caring about anything else and used his trump card. Instantly, the Sword of Burial of Heaven exploded with its strongest power. It released a pitch-black sword light that was thousands of feet long and slashed towards martial god Tianju's head. Chapter 24:11. This was the last move of the Burial of Heaven's 9 swords. It was also the most unfathomable and powerful sword move. As the sword radiance descended from the sky, the night sky collapsed and the spiritual chi in the area evaporated. Everything within a radius of 1,000 miles was destroyed. No matter how powerful martial god Tianju was, when he saw the huge black sword slashing down and sensed the terrifying nirvana aura, he was shocked. He could not believe that Ji Tianqing, who was only a martial sage, could unleash such power. As expected of Kenshin. At that moment, this was the only thought in his mind. Without hesitation, he waved his palms and shot out a gold and silver radiance that formed a huge vortex. Apparently, he wanted to make use of the stellar teleportation skill to neutralize Ji Tianqing's trump card. However, the outcome was beyond his expectations. Crack! The moment the gold and silver vortex was formed, it collapsed. After all, everything within a radius of 1,000 miles was destroyed. The area turned into a cold void and a raging void windstorm immediately engulfed martial god Tianju. His expression changed immediately, and he hurriedly activated his protective divine power to resist the windstorm's attack. At the same time, the huge black sword slashed down and hit him. Kaboom! In the deafening explosion, martial god Tianju was engulfed by the black sword radiance. The golden protective light shield shattered into countless pieces on the spot. His sturdy divine body was also covered in cracks, and golden divine blood spurted out from his body. His left shoulder was cut off by the huge sword and his entire left arm flew out and exploded into golden powder in the void. The wound on his shoulder extended down to his chest and to his abdomen. He was like a broken porcelain bowl that would shatter at the slightest touch. Martial god Tianju floated in the void and his body trembled violently. He was furious and terrified. He stared at Ji Tianqing with bloodshot eyes and roared in a hoarse voice, "How is this possible?" No matter what, he could not accept this outcome. He was a rank 6 martial god and he had been severely injured by a martial sage and had lost an arm. There was nothing more ridiculous than this in the world. Only a divine artifact can hurt me. Martial god Tianju broke free from the spatial storm and stepped out of the dark void, returning to heaven and earth. He stared unblinkingly at the sword of burial of heaven and growled with a twisted face, "Your sword, the sword of burial of heaven has already returned to being a divine artifact." This was the only answer that could explain why he was injured. Ji Tianqing stood in the night sky 100 miles away and looked at him coldly. He nodded and said, "That's right. So, you're going to die soon. In your dreams." Martial god Tianju roared crazily, "I am immortal." As soon as he finished speaking, his entire body ignited with golden flames that soared into the sky as he charged towards Ji Tianqing. "Ji Tianqing, you're the one who should die." The golden divine flame tore through the sky like a meteor, and fiercely blasted toward Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, was fearless. His hands formed a profound spell and he took out the god-slaying flying dagger. Swoosh! Under his control, the 3-inch-long god-slaying flying dagger expanded to 1,000 feet long. Like a giant blade that could split the heavens and earth, it slashed toward the golden divine flame with an aura that could destroy everything. Ji Tianqing knew very well that martial god Tianju was so angry that he was on the verge of madness. He couldn't resist such a powerful charge at all, even if he used the Heaven Burier sword. Only the god-slaying flying dagger, a mediocre divine artifact, was qualified to fight against it. Kaboom! In the earth-shattering explosion, the god-slaying flying dagger and the golden divine flame collided, causing golden light and sparks to cover the sky. At that moment it was as if the golden sun was hanging high in the sky, illuminating thousands of miles. The entire area was covered by the golden light. It was so bright that people could not open their eyes. The destructive shockwave spread out in all directions, covering a radius of 3,000 miles. All the mountains, forests, and grasslands in the area were blasted into ruins. The earth trembled incessantly, and the sky was obscured by endless smoke and dust. Naturally, the outcome of the battle between Ji Tianqing and martial god Tianjue was decided. Martial god Tianju, who was already severely injured, was almost cut in half by the god-slaying flying dagger. Half of his face was gone, and his body was covered in wounds from which golden divine blood kept pouring out. His internal organs were all ruptured, and blood kept pouring out of his mouth and nose. Martial god Tianju's body was bent, and he panted in pain. His divine power was also rapidly weakening. He finally calmed down and suppressed the anger in his heart. Even though he was unwilling, he had to admit a fact. His injuries were too severe. If he continued to fight, he would be killed by Ji Tianqing before he could kill Ji Tianqing. Even if he could survive, his divine body would be destroyed. If his divine body was destroyed, his strength would definitely plummet, and he would need to rest for at least 1,000 years to recover. He could not afford to pay such a heavy price. Therefore, martial god Tianju endured the humiliation and decisively chose to escape. Whoosh! He used a spatial secret technique and tore open the golden sky. He escaped into an alternate space and teleported away. Moreover, this result was too humiliating. He did not even have the thought of leaving a few harsh words. In the blink of an eye, martial god Tianju disappeared from this world. At the same time, Ji Tianqing put away the god-slaying flying dagger, covered his chest with his hand, bent over and coughed violently. Cough, cough, as he panted and coughed, golden divine blood poured out of the corner of his mouth and sprinkled on his white robe. His hair was disheveled, and his body was covered in dust and blood. He was in an extremely sorry state. His strength had also weakened, and his magic power was empty. Even though he saw martial god Tianju escape with his own eyes, he could not stop or chase after him. Moreover, he did not have time to heal himself. He quickly turned around and flew into the distance. The destructive shockwave just now sent Ji Ku and Yunyao flying. Ji Ku was 100 miles to the south, lying in a deep pit covered in blood. Half of her body was covered in mud. If not for the protection of the heavenly star chain, her body would have been shattered. Ji Tianqing rescued her from the deep pit. After confirming that her life was not in danger, he gave her 2 healing pills and flew toward Yunyao. Yunyao was 100 miles to the west. She was crawling out of a gully. Although her hair was disheveled, her face was covered in blood, and her body was covered in mud, she looked very miserable. However, she had the protection of the divine armor. Her injuries were not too serious, and she could still fight. Ji Tianqing flew to her side and looked at her with concern. He asked about her injuries. "Yao Yao, how are you? Can you still hold on? You didn't hurt the children, did you?" Yunyao quickly shook her head and comforted him. "Don't worry, the children and I are fine. However, your injuries are the most serious. Don't waste time. Hurry up and heal." Ji Tianqing heaved a sigh of relief and nodded. "Okay, let's leave this place as soon as possible and find a place to heal." As soon as his voice fell, a shocking blood-red light suddenly lit up in the night sky 100 miles away. A sinister, cold laugh was heard. Chapter 24:12. Ji Tianqing, Yunyao, and Ji Ku had just gathered together and were about to leave. When they suddenly heard this sinister sneer, the 3 of them trembled as they revealed vigilant expressions. The 3 of them held their swords tightly and turned to look at the night sky 100 miles away. They saw a figure as huge as a mountain step out of the dazzling dark red light. It was a giant beast that looked like a bull demon. It was 3,000 feet tall and stood tall. It had 3 huge heads, 4 thick arms, and 6 pairs of blade-like black wings on its back. It was surrounded by a monstrous black aura with a bone-chilling aura of death. The moment it appeared, all the light within a radius of 10,000 miles was swallowed and the entire area was sealed in ice. Ji Tianqing's eyes narrowed when he saw the giant demon's figure. His eyes were filled with shock. "This is, the ancestor fiend celestial. It has recovered to the godly realm." Yunyao and Ji Ku froze. Their eyes were filled with shock and fear. They did not expect the ancestor fiend celestial to appear right after martial god Tianju escaped. Moreover, the ancestor fiend celestial had truly recovered to the martial god realm. Damn it! It's a fiend celestial from the ancient times. It's the grim reaper that had killed countless godly spirits. Although it has just recovered to the godly realm, its strength and techniques are even more terrifying than martial god Tianju's. Yunyao and Ji Ku looked at each other and communicated through voice transmission. They both had the intention to retreat. The 2 of them looked at Ji Tianqing and advised him through voice transmission. "Tianqing, the ancestor fiend celestial clearly came prepared. We're already heavily injured. It's not good to fight it. Brother Tianqing, I know you must kill the ancestor fiend celestial. But you're already heavily injured, let's avoid it and escape from this place first." Ji Tianqing stared coldly at the ancestor fiend celestial. He muttered in a low voice, "Of course I know that. But, can we escape?" Yunyao and Ji Ku frowned, and their hearts sank. At this moment, the ancestral devil god stepped through the air, bringing with him black gas and devil fire that covered the sky as he laughed loudly. "Ji Tianqing, I didn't expect you to have reached the half-step divine realm. The speed at which you recover your strength is truly unimaginable. However, this god is still 1 step ahead of you and recovered to the deity realm before you. Therefore, you are destined to die with hatred and become a stepping stone for this god to return to the peak." Ji Tianqing didn't answer it. He asked in a cold tone, "Martial god Tianju just left and you appeared right after. How can there be such a coincidence in the world?" If I'm not wrong, you two have been colluding for a long time, right? Ancestral devil god was stunned for a moment before he grinned. Ji Tianqing, you are already a dead man, so why are you still asking? This god is the ancestor of the demon race and martial god Tianju is the god of the human race. How can we be related? Furthermore, this god can't wait to kill him, so how can we be in collusion? Ji Tianqing revealed a mocking smile and said in a disdainful tone, don't deny it. Back in the Tian Xian continent, the demon emperor used the Taiyin soul-severing ruler to fight with me. After I killed him, the Taiyin soul-severing ruler flew away. 2 years ago, martial god Tianju's subordinate, Yi Lushui, used the Taiyin soul-severing ruler to assassinate me. This is the evidence of your collusion. The ancestral devil god frowned immediately, and the scarlet flames in his eyes flickered. He stared coldly at Ji Tianqing and suddenly sneered, his voice getting louder and louder. He. Ha ha ha. As expected of Kenshin, you actually guessed the truth from these little clues. Since his lie was exposed, the ancestral devil god didn't hide it anymore and admitted it. He nodded and sneered, that's right. Many years ago, martial god Tianju was searching for information all over the world, looking for clues to ascend. Later, he found out about the ancient war of gods and the legends of this god. Therefore, he assisted the ancient demon emperor to nurture this god's remnant soul and help me to be reborn. In exchange, this god promised him that after I recovered to the godly state, I would help him leave this world. The ancestral devil god only used a few words to explain the contents of his deal with martial god Tianju. However, in reality, the cooperation and deal between the two sides took a very long time, and there were many twists and turns in the process. Ji Tianqing naturally understood that things were not as simple as what the ancestral devil god said. However, at this juncture, he was not in the mood to get to the bottom of it. Humph! Martial god Tianju, this despicable beast. As the leader of the human race, he actually colluded with the ancient demon emperor for his own selfish interests. He really doesn't deserve to be called a human. Ji Tianqing cursed angrily. The ancestral devil god sneered disdainfully. So what if you betrayed the human race and cooperated with this god? You have the secret of ascension and can leave this sealed world. How can you understand the despair of the other martial gods? Those martial gods finally crossed the peak of the martial way and reached the legendary godly state with great difficulty. They thought that they could live forever, but who knew that they could not escape the 10,000-year limit and would never have the hope of ascension? Do you know what kind of helplessness and torment that was? Ji Tianqing sneered and did not comment. The ancestral devil god continued. Which of the martial gods of the past did not try to find a way to ascend? In order to ascend, martial god Tianju did not hesitate to help this god revive. In order to unlock the world seal, Luo Shui did not hesitate to spend a few hundred years to search for Yaoguang's inheritance. At this point, its gaze was as sharp as a sword as it looked at Yun Yao. It grinned and said, Yun Yao, do you think that Luo Shui wholeheartedly nurtured you because she is kind and benevolent? What a joke! Which god did not rise by stepping on mountains of corpses and seas of blood? How can there be a kind person? Luo Shui used you as a cauldron to revive Yaoguang and then take over your body. Her final goal was to turn herself into Yaoguang. Suddenly hearing this, Yun Yao's body shook. She subconsciously shook her head and instinctively retorted. Nonsense! The Divine Master is noble and virtuous. How can she be slandered by a despicable devil like you? No matter what you say, I will not believe a single word you say. You don't have to sow discord anymore. This is really a clumsy move. The ancestral devil god immediately raised his head and laughed. Ha ha ha. Looks like Luo Shui's disguise is very deep and has deceived everyone in the world. She has gained your trust. It's a pity that her plan is going to fail. You, Yaoguang's substitute, will be turned into ashes tonight. In my previous life, in order to suppress this god, Yaoguang's soul was scattered. In this life, this god will definitely not give her a chance to revive. I will kill her now. When he finished speaking, the ancestral devil god raised his 4 huge devil claws and unleashed a bloodlight that covered the sky and earth, smashing down on Yun Yao's head. The overflowing blood light covered 1,000 miles of the sky and sealed off the area. Chapter 24:13. At the critical moment, Yun Yao and Ji Ke unleashed their full strength, brandishing their swords to create a sky full of sword gleams. Bam! 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 However, the blood sea formed by the blood light still enveloped the 3 of them. Whoosh! 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 Huge waves rolled in the blood sea, creating a force that could topple mountains and overturn seas. The 3 of them were sent flying. Ji Tianqing raised his palms with a solemn expression. He formed a mysterious seal in front of him and used the demon suppression mystic art. 3 pure mystic qi, wind and thunder to suppress the demons. He roared furiously. His robe fluttered in the wind, and his body expanded to a height of 30 meters. His back emitted a dazzling golden light. At this moment, he was tall and mighty. His aura was sacred and domineering, as if a deity had descended. Boom! Crack! In the next moment, he pushed his palms forward, releasing golden divine flames that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, as well as dazzling 5-colored lightning. Boom! 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 The golden divine flames poured into the blood sea like floodwaters, evaporating countless skeletons and demon shadows. Dense raindrops of 5-colored divine lightning fell on the blood sea one after another, blasting hundreds of holes in the blood sea. With Ji Tianqing as the center, the blood sea within a 100-mile radius was riddled with holes. Yun Yao and Ji Ke felt the pressure disappear. They quickly retreated to his side and joined forces with him to fight the enemy. After all, Ji Tianqing had more experience in dealing with the demon race. However, the ancestor fiend celestial waved his hand and shot out endless blood light, repairing the broken blood sea immediately. Swish! 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 The blood sea rose into the sky and immediately formed a 1,000-mile cage, sealing the 3 of them. The ancestor fiend celestial stood high in the sky and looked down at the 3 of them. He sneered with a hideous expression. Ji Tianqing, Yun Yao, if this is all you have, it's time to end this. I'll end you now and take away Yaoguang's inheritance and Kenshin's bloodline. Ha ha ha, this is the result of going against this god. To the ancestral fiend celestial, the person it hated the most was actually goddess Yaoguang. In ancient times, it led 3,000 blood gods and billions of demon race citizens to slaughter the entire 5 elements world. The deities of various races were slaughtered by it, and countless of them died. The entire 5 elements world would fall under its demonic claws, and the living beings of all races would become the slaves of the devil race. Not only that, but the ancestral fiend celestial also wanted to conquer the outer realm and rule over the myriad worlds. The boundless and bright journey was right in front of him. However, goddess Yaoguang appeared and led the gods in a counterattack. In the end, in order to kill it, goddess Yaoguang did not hesitate to detonate her godhead and sacrifice her life. That was how the ancestral demon god was killed and the terrifying calamity was quelled. However, if goddess Yaoguang were to know of this in the underworld, she would definitely die with everlasting regret. Who would have thought that the ancestral devil god had not truly disappeared? 30,000 years later, it actually made a comeback. This time, it would definitely not fail. It would definitely kill all those who stood in its way. Therefore, not only did it want to kill Ji Tianqing, it also wanted to get rid of Yun Yao. As for Ji Ke, it would just kill him along the way. It was not worth mentioning. Calamity of blood prison. Soul burning and blood refining. The ancestral fiend celestial waved its 4 palms and struck out an ancient demonic Tao seal, releasing a divine ability. Immediately, the bloody light cage within a radius of 500 kilometers began to shrink. It exploded with a power that could suppress everything, ruthlessly suppressing Ji Tianqing in company. Not only that, but the bloody light also ignited with flames, burning their souls and refining their bloodlines. Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku immediately felt piercing pain all over their bodies, as if they were being dismembered. Ji Ku and Ji Tianqing's bodies were instantly covered in blood, and they let out painful groans. Yin Yao's golden divine armor also flashed with golden light and rippled with powerful divine power. Fortunately, the divine armor's defense was strong enough and could temporarily block the ancestral Fiend Celestial's divine ability. However, it was unknown how long the divine armor could block it. In this desperate situation, Ji Tianqing did not hesitate to use his trump card, activating the power of the heaven-mending pearl in his mind. Fire of light, destroy all evil. He formed hand seals with both hands, gritting his teeth as he shouted angrily. Sacred white light exploded from his body. Swoosh! The dense sacred brilliance soared into the sky like a pillar of fire, dispersing the bloody flames within a radius of 50 kilometers. The suppression of the blood prison, the burning pain of the bloody flames, and the burning pain of the bloody flames also instantly dissipated. With the protection of the heaven-mending pearl, the pressure on the 3 of them was greatly reduced, and the pain was also greatly reduced. The ancestral Fiend Celestial immediately frowned and looked at Ji Tianqing with a gloomy gaze. He muttered softly, "What pure divine power of the origin! It can actually dispel my supreme demonic power. That's not right. He has not recovered to the godly realm, so how can he release divine power? He must have used a divine artifact." The ancestral Fiend Celestial tried a few times, activating the blood prison with all his might to suppress and refine Ji Tianqing and the others. However, the sacred white light within a radius of 50 kilometers formed a huge shield that was indestructible. When the endless bloody flames came into contact with the white light, they melted like snow. For a moment, the blood prison was actually unable to do anything to Ji Tianqing and the others. As expected, you have some skills. Looks like that divine artifact's grade is not low. However, do you think you can stop me just like that? The ancestral Fiend Celestial laughed sinisterly as he descended from the sky and attacked. World exterminating demonic blade. Black Sun Calamity. He waved his 4 huge demonic claws and shot out dozens of pitch-black demonic blades that were hundreds of meters long, attacking Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku. At the same time, he flapped his 6 pairs of blade-like black wings, creating 12 black hurricanes that attacked the 3 of them. Those pitch-black hurricanes were the Black Sun Calamity of the 3 disasters and 9 disasters. Its power was extremely terrifying. Ji Tianqing was busy controlling the heaven-mending orb to block the blood prison's attack. Seeing the ancestral Fiend Celestial coming for him, he could only try his best to activate the heaven-mending orb's power to strengthen the white light shield. Bam! 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 Although the sacred white light could restrain demonic abilities and power, shattering the bam! 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 Ji Tianqing was shaken. His face was as pale as paper as blood flowed out of his nose and mouth. Then, 12 black sun hurricanes came crashing down, bombarding the white light shield. Bam! 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 The black sun hurricanes attacked more than 100 times before they were dispersed by the sacred white light and disappeared on the spot. However, the white light shield became even thinner. It was already riddled with holes and was on the verge of shattering. Ji Tianqing's aura became even weaker. The heaven-mending orb's power was also rapidly weakening. He was very clear that he could only hold on for another 15 minutes before the heaven-mending orb's power was exhausted. When that time came, he would not be able to block the blood prison's power and might be killed on the spot. With that thought, Ji Tianqing's expression became even more serious. He prayed in his heart, "There is great terror in life and death, but there is also great opportunity." Chapter 24:14. Ji Tianqing's injuries were severe, and he was very weak. However, he did not think of running away. He gritted his teeth and continued to fight the ancestor fiend celestial, neutralizing all kinds of divine abilities and secret techniques. He only wanted to get closer to death in the battle, so as to stimulate his potential and break through the shackles of the martial god realm. As time passed, the white light barrier became thinner and thinner. The heaven-mending pearl's power was also depleting, and it was gradually running out. However, Ji Tianqing still showed no signs of breaking through. The ancestor fiend celestial could also see that his power was weakening, and he was about to run out. Therefore, it was not anxious at all. It continued to use the blood prison's power to suppress Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ku Ku. At the same time, it continued to release the power of disaster, bombarding the white light barrier. Source of deadly poison. Umbra plague. Great sun fire. The power of disaster of different colors turned into a flood, an overwhelming light blade, and a torrent of fire, bombarding the white light barrier. Bam! 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 Following the deafening explosion, the white light barrier trembled violently, and dense cracks appeared on it. Ji Tianqing's body also shook violently, and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He looked even more haggard. Soon, 100 breaths' time passed. The ancestor fiend celestial struck out with 4 giant bloody palms, which descended from the sky and struck the white light barrier. Boom! Crack! Amidst the deafening explosion, the white light barrier collapsed on the spot, exploding into billions of blazing white fragments. An incomparably violent shockwave spread out in all directions, covering a radius of several thousand miles. Ji Tianqing was sent flying, and blood spurted out of his orifices as he fell 100 miles away, swallowed by the bloody waves. Ji Ku and Yun Yao were also sent flying, falling into the blood sea in a sorry state, falling into a muddle-headed state. Both of them were severely injured, and their minds were corroded by the demonic aura. Their vision was blurry. However, both of them relied on their strong willpower to charge out of the blood sea, and work together to rescue Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's injuries were the most severe. He was lying unconscious in the sea of blood, and golden divine blood was gushing out from his body. The ancestral demon god stood at the peak of the blood prison, looking down at the 3 people floating in the blood sea, and laughed complacently. Ha ha ha. Kenshin, Yao Guang. What do you have to fight this god? Now that all of you are at the end of the road and your lives are in my hands, what are your thoughts? You all claim to be the saviors of the world and are willing to be enemies with this god for the peace of the world. Now, I'm going to tear you into pieces, grind your bones, and scatter your ashes. Can the people of the world save you? The ancestor Archfiend Celestial's voice was as loud as a bell, his tone filled with contempt and disdain. The 3 people in the blood sea ignored its words. Shua! Yin Yao and Ji Ku flew to Ji Tianqing's side and wanted to help him up. However, Yin Yao suddenly realized that Ji Tianqing, who seemed to be unconscious, was enveloped in a layer of dense golden light. His body was moving, and the blood in his body was boiling, brewing an unparalleled divine aura. Seeing this change, Yun Yao was stunned for a moment, and then she revealed a look of surprise. Tianqing. You broke through at the last minute. You're about to break through to the godly realm. Ji Ku also came to a realization, and revealed an expression of disbelief. She said excitedly, "That's great. Big brother Tianqing has obtained a fortuitous encounter between life and death, and is about to break through to the godly realm. Once he recovers to the godly realm, he will definitely be able to defeat the ancestor Archfiend Celestial. She had absolute and blind confidence in Ji Tianqing. No matter how strong the opponent was, she believed that Ji Tianqing would never be defeated. At this moment, the ancestor Archfiend Celestial also noticed that Ji Tianqing was acting strangely. He immediately frowned, and shouted with a gloomy expression, "You want to break through at the last minute in front of this god? Wishful thinking." Just as he finished speaking, he waved his palm, creating a sky full of bloody light, which transformed into 4 sky-splitting giant blades, slashing towards Ji Tianqing. Yun Yao and Ji Ke saw that Ji Tianqing was still in the midst of his transformation, so they stepped forward and used their arts to block the attacks without any regard for their own safety. At this moment, the two of them had forgotten that they were severely injured, and they also disregarded their own lives. Crack! Crack! Amidst the loud sound, the sword beams that the two of them had unleashed were shattered into pieces by the bloody blades. In the next moment, the bloody blades were about to hit the two of them, and they would either die or be severely injured. At this critical moment, Ji Tianqing, who seemed to be in a deep sleep, suddenly opened his eyes. Swoosh! Golden divine flames ignited all over his body, and he transformed into a giant golden sword. He soared into the sky from the sea of blood, and met the 4 bloody blades head-on. Bam! 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 The giant golden sword and the bloody blades clashed, creating a loud sound that shook the heavens, and countless bloody shards splashed out. The blood prison, which had a radius of 1,000 miles, was also destroyed by the shockwave, creating a huge crater that was 300 miles wide. The ancestor Fiend Celestial was hit by the backlash, and his body shook, and his expression became extremely painful. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianqing grabbed Yun Yao and Ji Ke, and escaped from the blood prison. Swoosh! With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianqing teleported 500 miles away, and brought the two of them back to the night sky. Yun Yao and Ji Ke had escaped death, and they both looked relieved. The two of them did not bother to check their own injuries, and they both turned to look at Ji Tianqing, sizing him up with burning eyes. They saw him standing proudly in the night sky, his clothes and hair fluttering in the wind. Originally, he was severely injured, and he looked miserable. But now, he was full of fighting spirit, and there was not a single wound on his body, and his body was surrounded by a dense golden light. His body seemed to have become taller and stronger, and his aura was even more sacred and majestic, as if he was a god that had descended to the mortal world. Especially his pitch-black eyes, which were as deep as the void, containing endless vicissitudes and mysteries. Yun Yao and Ji Ke were excited and quickly asked about his situation. Tianqing, you broke through to the immortal state so quickly. That's impossible, right? Why aren't there any heaven and earth anomalies? If you didn't break through to the immortal state, how could your injuries have healed and your strength have returned to its peak? Facing their questions, Ji Tianqing shook his head and explained, my foundation is still not enough, and I still can't break through to the immortal state. If I really reach the immortal state, there will definitely be heaven and earth anomalies. Yun Yao and Ji Ke were both stunned for a moment, revealing a look of deep doubt. You didn't break through to the immortal state. Then why do you look like a different person? Ji Tianqing explained again, my shackles have loosened, but I can't really break through. So, I can only use a secret technique to temporarily reach the immortal state and deal with the ancestor Fiend Celestial. My state is called the false god state, and it can only last for a short period of time. Yun Yao and Ji Ke frowned at the same time, and a look of disappointment flashed in their eyes. I see. Big brother Tianqing, how long can the false god state last? Can you defeat the ancestor Fiend Celestial? Ji Tianqing said in a serious tone, at most 15 minutes. I think I can fight it to a draw, but it will be difficult to defeat it. We can't stay here for long. Ah Ku, bring Yao Yao back to the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda now. I can only deal with the ancestor fiend celestial when you are safe. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.